morning. Welcome to our November 16th, 2016 special meeting. Are there any public comments this morning? Okay, seeing none, we're going to adjourn into closed session. All right, good morning. Welcome to our November 15th, 2016 special meeting. And I'd just like to report out on our closed session. Public employee pursuant to Government Code Section 54957B1, Interim County Administrative Officer Board Action. None yet. We're going to resume back into closed session after we meet today. So with that, could you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so from there we have public comments. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction. Of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the board of supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the regular agenda. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued at the conclusion of the consent agenda in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard. So this morning, we will have 3-minute comments for public comments. Any public comments? No? Okay.
Good morning, House of Gallup, Taxpayer Association. Is there any reason to keep those doors locked out in front? I thought the meeting started at 9 o'clock this morning, so I had an opportunity to be out there for an hour and a half. And I noticed all kinds of people were trying the doors, and then they read the sign, they go to the side door. And the reason why we have it that way was because we had a security check because of the court system. We don't have security check now. And perhaps it would be time to take the signs down and have the doors open during working hours. Does that make sense? Happy day.
Good idea, Al. Another one.
I think it's in regards to the ADA compliance. The ADA entrance is over here. The ADA is this door isn't accessible.
Yeah, personally, I'd like to have the choice. All right. So let's move on to our regular agenda. We're going to switch the agenda around a little bit. Sheriff first, and then Sheriff second, and then some public works, okay? EOP first? Yep.
So item 2 is from the Sheriff's Office to adopt a resolution approving the revisions and updates to the 2016 Calaveras County Operational Area Emergency Operations Plan.
Good morning. Wade Whitney from the Sheriff's Office. So the 2016 update is just that. It's an update of the 2011 plan that was previously approved by the board. The 2016 update includes, we sent out a draft copy to department heads, had Dana from Cal OES review it. We had Cal Fire review it. This update reflects the suggestions from the department heads and the other departments that were involved. Do you guys have any questions about it?
Can you highlight any of the specifics?
I can say that are you talking about all the individual parts of the plan? Okay.
Any major highlights?
So part one of the plan talks about just general information. It mostly points out what the types of hazards are for the county, such as wildland fire, floods, extreme weather, pandemic flu, airplane crashes. It also talks about CAL FIRE aircraft crashes, and just general information about those, what the expected damage might be from those types of incidents. Then part two goes into the response phase, so the initial response, and it outlines what each of the individual departments within the county that might have a role within the response phase, what their roles and responsibilities would be for each of those hazards. And it's divided by hazard-specific information. And then moving into part three is the extended response operations. This mostly talks about the roles and responsibilities of everybody that's in the Emergency Operations Center during a response. And then finally, part four is the recovery operations. And it talks about roles and responsibilities for the different agencies within the county during recovery.
So was there any discussion about the organization chart to this plan? Or is this just continued from 2011?
It is a continuation. The one highlighted change that I can point out to you in the management section under part three, probably the most significant change. It used to refer to MAC, which is the Multi-Agency Coordination Committee. I changed it based on reviewing some emergency operations plans from other counties and in discussions with Chief White and some other people that are more familiar with these types of plans. I changed it to what I refer to as a management advisory group, and basically that group is all of the department heads that have a role within this plan. The MAC still exists and the MAC will take place, but the management advisory group becomes a core group that would meet during the EOC operations every day as well.
Sergeant Ray, do you sergeant now?
Yes.
Could you provide a reference page for that organizational chart?
199 is what I'm referring to as the management advisory group.
I guess when I look at this, it's like what I don't see on here, and I'm looking at packet page 29 and page 9. I don't see where the Board of Supervisors plays a role in this at all.
The Board of Supervisors would be advised of the information through the CAO's office, and then there also could be part of the MAC as well.
So you're basically taking 2.17 and tossing it?
I'm sorry, say it again.
2.17, which is the county code, right? 2.17.
I'm not familiar with the code that you're referring to.
Are you referring to the 1975 county? Okay. No, this is not replacing that. That still is in effect. But that also needs to be updated because it is a 40-some-odd-year-old document. This is a more modern plan. If you take a look at that 75, the titles of a lot of the things that are in here don't even exist anymore. That's why that document does need to be rewritten and modernized to today's standards. Sims and NIMS didn't even exist during that time.
And how many of these positions are currently filled at this point?
You mean the positions inside the EOC?
Yeah.
Uh,
Are all those pretty much all filled?
No. No, those would be filled by people that we bring in, depending on each of the,
Okay.
depending on each of the incidents.
Okay. Gotcha.
I will also say that this is in compliance with SIMS and NIMS, as Lieutenant Harvey mentioned. Is in line with the state emergency operations plan guidelines.
Is this a requirement to approve it every 5 years?
I don't recall if there's a requirement. Our plan specifically talks about having it updated every 3 years, actually.
Okay.
That's good.
Well, Sergeant, as I see your flow chart here, I see no reference to the Board of Supervisors being advised by any entity. Is that an oversight, or is that?
No, that, again, it would be the CAO's office when
It
they,
doesn't say that. It lists the county administration and the various departments there, but it makes no reference to the advising of the Board of Supervisors of any issue. Now, I might not be able to take the time right now to go into the documentation of it, but just by the flow chart.
no, it's not listed that way in the flow chart. That is correct.
Is it listed in the documentation somewhere?
No, not specifically.
So basically, they don't have to advise the Board of Supervisors, right?
It's my understanding they work for you, right?
Doesn't say that. Don't say it here.
Okay.
Supervisor Alvaro?
Yes, sir.
It would not be an oversight. We would absolutely, the county would be advising the board of any operations or actions, as the board has operational control over the budget, and as depending on the size and severity of the emergencies that we're dealing with, the board would be definitely brought into that and advised. It's not necessarily addressed right in here, but every step that is taken throughout the government and how we handle it, this would be a 900-page document if we noted every single step. This is not left to be intentionally left the board out. You're definitely involved. You're involved and get the briefings. If it's a small matter that is handled within a few hours, you may or may not want to know about it immediately. You may want to know about it a little bit later. When it morphs into something that's longer, you're definitely going to be getting contacted by Sheriff's Administration or the CAO's office.
Lieutenant, I understand that. That's the reality of it. Mm-hmm. Bottom line is, you're going to renew this every 3 years.
Yes.
We're going to have different people sitting in these chairs.
Yes, and
If we don't have any written documentation of how we're going to do this, and we have no guideline. And that's what my point is. What are we going to do in the future? How do we make this information in a handbook, if you will, so we can make sure we cover all these bases?
Well, it would be as simple as putting an insert into the flow chart saying that the Board of Supervisors will be notified during these events. We do it anyway, but if you prefer to have it in the writing,
Sounds like a great idea to me.
that's fine. The nice thing about having the board generally, because of your attrition, everybody, this sits on everybody's desk, every department head desk. We encourage the department heads and the Board of Supervisors to go through this and the hazard mitigation plan regularly, because there's a lot of information here, and even for us, who've gone to the trainings and everything. You have to go back and re-reference this stuff, and every time we have an incident, we're cracking this open and going through, okay, which situation do we have, and what's our checklist? And one of the first things is someone's going to be talking to the board, chair, the CAO, the sheriff, the captain, lieutenant, somebody. But if you feel more comfortable having a insert of just saying that in there, this is a fluid document, it can be changed. Even though this is updated every 3 years, it's not locked in every 3 years. We can change this. You could ratify, you could okay this today, and in a week from now, if something comes up, we can modify it.
I would feel more comfortable if there was a reference made, wherever it fits into your flow chart.
Very good.
And I understand reality, and we've been through this before, and I understand your position, and I agree with it. It's just, I may not be here.
Well, it is. It's all about education. That's part
Right.
of our job as well, is to keep the department heads and the board educated as to what we do as a management of the emergencies. And again, as long as people have this on their desk and they go through it, it makes it pretty clear what everybody's jobs and responsibilities are. And again, keeping the board in the loop is absolutely necessary. It's critical. It's not even a second thought in our minds.
Thank you.
Is this a document that can be revised? Later today, we're discussing about where OES looks like in the future. So can this be revised as needed and not waiting for the 3-year time frame or 1 year or whatever?
Yes.
Okay. Part of what I see is more or less what Supervisor Calaveras said in regards to identification of the Board of Supervisors under the Management Advisory Group. But I also, see agencies on there that the water agencies come to my mind. I think it's hard to cover all the different kinds of emergencies. You got to have a core. But I take something like the Butte Fire, and the water agencies were a key component to that. And I don't see where they would be serving in a advisory capacity on the management group. So I don't know how that all fits into it. I didn't see that in the document. Is it just because somebody knows, like, oh yeah, we want to go call them? Or how does that play out in this arena?
So the vision of the management advisory group was to allow the opportunity for all the department heads to meet separately with during an EOC activation. So the idea would be that the management advisory groups meet, let's say they meet at 7 o'clock in the morning for a briefing to discuss any policy information that we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. Then we could call a MAC meeting after that, and the MAC meeting would include those other agencies that you're referring to.
Yeah. So there's like a utility?
If you go down to like, was it page 178, it has the EOC director checklist there. And it goes on, established communications is required. Full mobilization of all communications could include law enforcement, fire, public works, health and medical, amateur radio operators, schools, Red Cross, utility companies. So they.
But I'm talking about including them.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
It's one thing to say, communicate out, but it's like including them in that process.
Well, in that management advisory group, we would decide which agencies do we need to bring in for the MAC. And that's when we would make those calls and have them respond to the EOC. Okay. Or, I'm sorry, not the EOC, to wherever we're going to have the meeting.
Because there might be incidents that you're not going to need the water.
Right. And I'm thinking more utilities. It's a broad base.
Yeah.
And there are charts in here that show all of those agencies, pages 74 through.
Right. Yeah, I see agencies listed. I just don't see where they're inclusive on the committee or the advisory group.
Yeah. And again, the idea behind the advisory group was for it to be a core group of county representatives that have a role in whatever the disaster is. The MAC group would expand from there.
Okay.
Yeah, then you guys would meet and discuss who needs to be engaged. you know, according to what you were dealing with.
Yes.
Without the board, right?
No, not necessarily without the board. Like I said, the board would become a part of the MAC group if you guys wanted to join those meetings.
But in a normal circumstance, if it was a major emergency like the Butte fire, the chair of the board at least, and would be included in those discussions with the CAO, I would imagine. I mean, that's just a given. Is that why it's such a given that you don't even need to put it in there? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. And I will point out also, Supervisor Olvera, that on page 52, it does talk about notifying the Board of Supervisors. It's not specific that dispatch calls the CAO and then the CAO notifies the Board of Supervisors, but there is documentation that talks about that.
That's on page 52, you said?
Yes.
You have to excuse me, our iPads don't
That's okay.
process faster than we have in the hard copies.
So back into the flow chart there. So you're going to add just Board of Supervisors in there, according to what Supervisor Olivera was saying?
Yes, I can add that in where they're being contacted by the CAO's office. Is that what I understood?
No, on the flow chart where it has the list of
The Management Advisory Group?
just add the Board of Supervisors in there, or chair of the board. Is that what we're saying? Do we want to just put the chair instead of having the whole board there, so we don't violate the Brown Act?
Yeah.
What are you guys going to do?
That was one of the concerns, was the Brown Act.
No?
They're asking about adding, remember the Management
When you
Advisory
see
Group?
a designee,
They want to add board chair to the Management Advisory
Doesn't matter to me.
rather than having the CAO.
Chair doesn't really get demonized, so it's better to just do the whole board.
Can you repeat the request, please, so I understand it clearly?
Let's go back to the flow chart again. That was,
Was it 158?
195, I believe.
Thank you.
Is that packet page 195 or?
I have packet 29.
I guess it was up if you're looking at the right thing.
Yeah,
It's
what page is the flow chart on?
actually in here twice. I can't find either one.
The flow chart I'm referring to is page 9 or packet page 29. That's,
No,
That was
the
my
organizational
reference
chart, I believe it was, for the EOC and the director. Yeah, that's it. Page 9. Why did I get 195?
maybe there's another one.
Yeah, I mean, I think just adding the chair of the board there, with county administrator would be fine for me.
As far as notifications go? Okay.
Right. So as I understand it, should we have an event occur where the MAC is activated, notifications would be made by the CAO's office to the Board of Supervisors? Is that how this program is designed to work?
Well, what you guys just discussed and was adding, you said the board to the Management Advisory Group.
Management Advisory Group.
Yes. So I will add that information to this flow chart,
Okay.
and then it'll take a little bit to update because I have to change all the other pages that go
And
with
who
that.
would be responsible for making that notification? Would it be under the EOC?
Well, that goes back to page 52.
Back to
So,
page 52.
so if there's an incident that requires Board of Supervisors notification, the Director of Emergency Services would be notified. Then the director would either make the notification to the CAO's office and the Board of Supervisors, or he or she can select to have our dispatch center notify the Board of Supervisors.
I would be comfortable with that.
The admin office or the dispatch center?
Depending on the severity of the event.
But I think that's fluid. It just depends on where the person is at the time, and
Yeah.
oftentimes the dispatchers are the ones
You
that
got a
are able to
Saturday
make the
night explosion.
notifications.
How are you going to get a hold of CAO? Dispatch center would have to make that notification through the direction of the EOC director.
Correct. And that may even occur before the EOC is ever open.
Sure. And I know as a board, we'd want to be advised of something like that, of a magnitude of that type of event. And I'm sure our realistic and our normal communications would take care of that to a certain extent. But once again, we're developing a plan. We have to develop this plan for someone that can look at it and see it and read it and interpret it.
Yeah.
On the first day of the event would be nice. Yeah. It says it's 17. Okay.
Public comment?
Public comment?
You're welcome.
Marty Crane, District 5. I just wanted to say that been involved with emergency preparedness for many, many years, and the SIMS process and NIMS process is a well-documented, researched and process that is accepted nationwide. I don't know about worldwide, but nationwide, and is used through Red Cross worldwide. So what I wanted to say was the first thing you learn when you get involved with this is to stay in your own lane. In other words, stepping out of your lane into something that someone else is in charge of creates chaos, creates negative impacts for those experts who are in charge of doing what they're supposed to do, and making the keeping the emergency from becoming a disaster. So my concern is, yes, the board should be notified, but what do you do with that information afterwards? Are you experts on emergency preparedness? Do you know what is? I think maybe our board, if you're going to be notified, you need to be productive and helpful in that scenario. So I think if you're going to be notified in this, I think you need to have some training. You, whoever else sits in these seats down the road, needs to have some training so that you don't undermine the efforts of those who are actually in charge of doing the work. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Alice Gallant, Taxpayer Association. There's some pretty good points made here. The most important thing is who's responsible for what. Okay, if the Sheriff's Department is going to be responsible for this activity, it follows that they need to coordinate and communicate with all the entities involved, including the Board of Supervisors, but in that process cannot be a disturbance of that responsibility. In other words, you can't have the Board of Supervisors and the Sheriff responsible for decisions. So it has to remain with the Sheriff. It's a separate entity. The emphasis, I think, is in the process of communicating with all the other people that are involved. I think that that's a no-brainer. And if that's what you're asking, is to assure that the communication takes place, I think that's a good idea. That'll work real well. But if it's being implied that the Board of Supervisors will extend control over this activity, then we run into a problem on how that's to be. And it could end up where you have unintended negative consequences where you have delays because of the decision-making process is convoluted. So if we stick with the idea that this process is under the sheriff, he's held accountable, he's a public official, he's elected, and or will be, then I think it works best. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments?
Good morning. My name is Bill Winhold. I live here in District 1. I'm encouraged by some of the comments that I've heard this morning that the board and others have taken the time to review the document that's before you here. I worked for the county for over a decade in emergency management, and I still work in emergency management in another organization. I've heard comment already about the plan being compliant with current NIMS and SIMS regulations. I can tell you that my organization, too, has to have detailed plans to be compliant with regulations, but frequently those don't go far enough. And so there's been comment this morning about how detailed and lengthy your emergency operations plan should be. The fact is that it should be as lengthy as you have time to write. What you are looking at endorsing today is simply a guide, and without having specifics to it, there's no details on how to make that guide operational. That was one of the major issues, I believe, in the Butte fire. The county had an emergency operations plan, but there was not a plan on how to make that functional. That's a critical element. Just having the document is just another binder on the shelf. It's another check on the box. It's a permission slip from the feds and the states that you are compliant with the regulations to be a participant in emergency management programs, but that doesn't mean that you're any better prepared or ready for the next crisis that comes to the community. So you're taking a positive step this morning by updating and reviewing that document, but that's only one step in the process of emergency management. And I would encourage you to hold all the other officials to complete the process by making that plan operational and practiced, and not just something else that's on the bookshelf that met the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments? Board comments?
Chair, I have a comment. We all learn from experience. I think we can almost all agree that one of the problems we faced with the Butte fire was communication. Mr. Segala, you were absolutely correct in your public comments. We need to have, number one, the information available from our responsible entities like our sheriff's department, like our fire departments, like our social services. That information has to be accurate, has to be correct, because we are the avenue, the catalyst to the public. And I'm talking about Board of Supervisors. We have to make sure that we are properly informed with the right information at the proper time. Because they're not calling the sheriff's department, they're not calling the fire department, they're not calling human services, they're calling us. And I am not going to put myself in a position to provide inaccurate information when it comes to saving lives or risking lives for the safety of this county. That's why I think the Board of Supervisors should be appraised, advised with the correct information at the proper time. And that's up to the entities that are doing that job: Sheriff's Department, Fire Department, Social Services, and et cetera. And that's my position on why we ought to be a part of this in that limited role. We can't interfere with what you folks do best. You are first responders. You're the experts. But then again, our job doesn't stop when the fire gets out. Our job lasts, as you well know, 2 to 5, 6 years down the road on recovery. And we've got to be right in what we do. And I mean jointly right, everybody. And I don't think we've had that luxury on this event. And I want to prevent that in the future.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. My only comment is that certainly find out who you're working with when you go through something like this. And I thought the Sheriff's Department did a fantastic job on response. I don't think that I couldn't see anybody doing anything better than what they did. So, other than that, it's going to move forward with the way it is. And we'll see the next time how it works. Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. I think the overall program is a good start, but I have to agree with Bill is that, I think there needs to be more detail into it overall, so that's clearly communicated. I look at places like evacuation centers and Butte Fire was a prime example of the regionalization of support that we needed and received from, hospitals and staging areas and locations for people to stay and so on and so forth. So, I hope that this is a good start and it doesn't go on a shelf because we get grant money and, we committed that part of it, that we continue to drill down on this a bit and be more specific and the overall plan. And certainly there's a lot of other agencies that I can see being involved as well as we narrow down on this. But it is a good start.
Okay. Now motion? A motion to approve.
I'll move to approve.
Second. Okay, we got a motion by Supervisor Olivera, second by Supervisor Wright. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Next agenda item.
We're going to skip to item 4, request, it's from the Sheriff's Department to request the Board of Supervisors to review the Office of Emergency Services Strategic Staff Planning Overview and Presentation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair. Hopefully, with this presentation, we can relieve some of your concerns about what you all just talked about with OES and the process that we're going to be looking at. Here's, we have a we already
have those are for the public.
Oh, you guys have?
That's for the public. Those are for the public.
Okay, I thought those were for them too. We have a slideshow presentation we're going to put on for you. There'll be multiple folks coming up to talk about certain areas. Once Ms. Munson gets it up and running. Again, this is just a presentation on how to bring OES back in, which we've talked about in the past. There's a lot more detail that we can go into, either now if you need to. At the end, we'll have some questions and answers if you guys want, or as we go. Prefer to rather run through the program to show you where we're at. And if you have any questions, we'll go from there. Captain Macedo, go ahead and start it.
Good afternoon. Jim Macedo from the Sheriff's Office. A little bit of a historical perspective from Calaveras County OES history. The Office of Emergency Services was operating under the CAO's office from the mid-1990s through 2003. In 2003, the Sheriff's Office brought Clay Hawkins over as the Sheriff's Captain to serve as the OES manager, and with him, the OES division was born. The OES division at one point in time was comprised of basically 7 part and full-time staff members, and it's going to be a little bit difficult, but we're going to do our best to explain how over time some of those people worked full-time and part-time in the OES division and what they were able to accomplish during that time. It is important, though, to note that once the economy started to worsen and layoffs and resignations and reassignments occurred, so there was kind of a constant state and flow of people moving in and out of that division. Again, we'll try and explain that. Some of those positions were absorbed through layoffs. And then ultimately in 2014, we ended up having to transfer another OES position to patrol. And as we speak today, we have the 1 part-time sergeant and 1 sheriff's services technician, and then the special operations lieutenant, Hubbardy, who oversees OES. He also has some oversight and middle management of other divisions. So with that, I'll bring up Lieutenant Dennis Hubbardy, and he's going to take the next couple of slides.
The slide before you right there is the comparison of what OES was when it was at full capacity from 2000 to 2010, prior to the economy taking a downturn. On the right, it shows you what the current staffing is, which was part of the historical on the previous slide. And you can see pretty much, even though some of the sergeant and the deputy position is noted as emergency only, those folks were out at the airport working under the same roof as OES. So they were a resource at any given time, depending on what the situation was. At that time, OES was functioning with the hazmat and EOD bomb teams. And that's explains the 2 hazmat specialist technicians down below, which with it currently does not exist under our current OES. And on the right is what we're operating on today. Next slide, please. Now, this is for just to show if there were no layoffs and the OES staff stayed in place. We didn't have anybody retiring, and if the economy didn't change, and if OES was to be maintained as it was back then to today's standards, that would be what the flow chart would look like for OES and the relative salaries. And on the right shows basically what that would cost to run that division by today's dollars if OES did not shrink down in the past 6 years.
We're going to go through some slideshows. These are some of the counties we went down and visited: Shasta County, Santa Barbara County, Ventura County. Shasta County is run by the Sheriff's Office, go ahead to the next slide. This is run by the Sheriff's Office. This is their mobile command center. They do not have an EOC like we do, so this is what they use. They take it out to their sites. This is the inside. This is the back portion of it where they do their briefings with their command staff. This is just another view. They've got a printer there on the right-hand side. Their communication center, they had it set up for 2 dispatchers, again, specifically set up for being on site. This is Cal OES. They are a Region 3 hub for Cal OES, so they have this unit available to them. It's a portable satellite system. What you can't see on the other side of this is a huge generator that this truck pulls so that they have accessibility to electrical and, I believe, phone system also. Go ahead, Sheriff. This is Santa Barbara. This is run by the county. This is all run underneath their CAO's office. This is a portion of their command center. Multiple stations. Go ahead, Sheriff, next slide. They have 42 stations in total, obviously a pretty good-sized county. But these stations are manned all during an emergency, again, depending on the type of the emergency. We chose them and Ventura County because they have a lot of the same type of disasters with fires, flooding, and whatnot, is why we use them as comparison. Next slide. Again, their mappings on the wall, all their stations for all their different facilities. And it's kind of hard to see, but if you look up on the ceiling, that back left corner, you'll see a red. I think that was their finance. The one to the right is in blue. I think that was their logistics. So they had different areas set up for different portions of what's going on within the EOC. Next slide. This is their organizational chart. Wade Whitney's going to come up and chat a little bit about that.
So this is basically the ICS structure inside their EOC. It's very similar to what you saw in our emergency operations plan. And those are all positions that could be filled during an incident. And all the different units.
Okay, sure. This next slide is Ventura County. Again, they have multiple stations inside of their EOC. It's a designated area for their EOC, much like what we have. Actually quite a bit larger, though. Next slide. Again, multiple stations for a lot of people. Ventura County, by size, isn't a whole lot different from ours. They have a lot more population, but their population is more centralized. They have a lot more buckbrush areas. Next slide. This is one of their command vehicles. It's a Chevy Tahoe, and you can't really see in this picture, but in the back of the vehicle you can see the slide out. They have a whiteboard. They have different units. They have a printer there on the right. They have a TV. You didn't notice it on the top of there, but they have a satellite dish so that they can get TV stations. And the reason they did that is they found that the news flying over, and they get their information so fast because of social media and whatnot, that people were coming up to them and saying, hey, did you know this was going on? And they didn't know. So they put TV on board so that they could monitor that stuff and see what was going on. So next slide. Oh, okay. Go back one. Again, this is just another picture of the inside of it. There's multiple things going on within this vehicle. This is something that they would take out to a site so that they could monitor it from the site. However, they do have their EOCs inside of the office there. Next slide. Count Macedo? Oh, yeah.
Sure, you can stay on the same slide. I want to just reiterate the reasons we went and contacted Shasta, Ventura, and Santa Barbara is all three of those offices of emergency services are recognized as being well run, well put together, and experienced specifically with fires, floods, landslides. Ventura had a landslide that they went over with us and how they dealt with that. And for those of you that were here in 1997, we had a landslide, and we're not immune to having those types of threats. Ventura had also dealt with an airline crash. And we, as many of you probably have seen, we have commercial airliners that fly over this county. So we wanted to discuss agencies that have handled similar hazards, and we specifically chose those because they're not all run by the Sheriff's Office. We know that was one of the questions as to whether or not have a CAO model run, which Santa Barbara does, and we talked to them and specifically about benefits of that versus issues. The same with Ventura, and we'll tap into that later if you have specific questions. This next slide, though, I'd like you to pay particular attention to because it is Ventura. Go back, Sherry, I'm sorry. It is Ventura's organizational chart. There seems to be a lot of questions about notification, and we're going to talk about communications and notifications quite a bit here in the next half hour or so. But the organizational chart shows where there's actually a sheriff in between, or an undersheriff in between that captain and the sheriff. But they have a civilian OES manager. That's who we spent most of the time talking with. We talked to him extensively about his background and his training, his leadership, his capabilities, his role within the county, and his role within the community. He has an administrative aide that handles, obviously, fleet and office management and special projects. And then you'll see that there are two senior program administrators. They're kind of deputies to that civilian OES manager. A lot of them handle the planning and preparedness sections, working with fire, animal services, and the rest of the county emergency and department heads, both non-emergency and emergency department heads. You have some program administrators that actually respond, and they manage the Emergency Operations Center. You have some staff services manager, and you notice that is as needed. They move those folks in and out of the Office of Emergency Services, and they specifically handle training and exercises throughout the community. And then at the bottom you have some program administrators, and the one on the left-hand side you'll notice deals with recovery and finance. We specifically asked both the OES manager and the program administrators what their role was in working with the county post-event during recovery, and they work with the respective department heads to manage the recovery. But I want to be crystal clear, none of them actually go into the county departments and do the work for them. They help facilitate through the state Cali OES, FEMA, and any other entity that they need to work with. They facilitate that. They don't actually go work inside. And we asked, why is that? And specifically because you cannot expect a program administrator to become an expert in, say, public health and public works. Those are two incredibly different fields. You cannot hire a jack of all trades and expect them to take on the role as an expert for all of these other county departments. Everybody has an expertise in their field. And the reason I want to emphasize that so much is I don't want the public or the board thinking that we're going to be able to comprise an Office of Emergency Services in this county that is going to be able to replace county employees or county department heads and be an expert in recovery with those departments. That model doesn't exist, at least that we can find in California through county OES systems. Next slide.
A question, Captain.
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you. Of these positions we just discussed, are any of these sworn personnel positions to the Sheriff's Department?
If you could roll back.
Down.
So we're going to show you some models later,
Okay.
recommendations, but on this one, the civilian OES manager is non-sworn. I can tell you he was an excellent fit in our organization because he was prior military, so he understood chain of command, role within an organization, but none of those people below the rank of captain were sworn for Ventura, to clarify. Next slide. This is their operations structure, and you'll notice up top, if it's a major emergency that goes to the federal level, that FEMA, they have a joint field office where FEMA is stationed there in Ventura County. They work closely with California Office of Emergency Services and the State Operations Center. They too have a MAC group. That MAC group also works with the Ventura County Operational Area and County Emergency Operations Center, which is again run by the Sheriff's Office, but it's often done under a joint command with fire or whoever the hazard is. Off to the side, one of their rooms in their EOC, they have a JIC, which is kind of a joint information center. They run press info out of the JICs. Both Santa Barbara and Ventura did the same. And when they're wanting to release information so you don't have such a crowded chaos type mess going on during your MACs and during your EOCs, they have a separate room, and that information is passed off, and different people are assigned to that role specifically, and that works well and worked well with everybody. And that was some of the problems we had, I will tell you, with the Butte fire, because we had too many people in our EOC. We had too many people trying to point fingers and make suggestions that were, seen as semi-orders. So the different rooms, that's why the sheriff spent time talking about and pointing out photos of those rooms, because it's important to keep a clean house during an emergency. The ACPs or the ICPs, the Incident Command Posts, if you could reflect back to the Shasta County photos that the sheriff showed you with the motorhome. Shasta has a little bit of a different model, but basically they move their EOC kind of out into the field. It's definitely shrunk down. That piece of equipment is incredibly expensive. There's a lot of equipment in there. Some of it was donated. Some of it was found because they happened to find the right guy to build it out and help them. But their model was a little bit different. Ventura utilizes the same model, but they use that mobile Chevy Tahoe vehicle to place an incident commander out close to the scene. We do the same thing. We have some of that equipment, but not near to the extent some of those other agencies are. And again, when you're talking about communication, when in this county we've spoke a lot about towers and our inability to communicate, and rural and remote areas, and the need for more repeating sites. So they've kind of tried to work around that by building these expensive vehicles that have additional communications capabilities. The cities, the respective cities in Ventura County also have their own small EOCs. They work closely with the county. If it's an isolated incident, the county can move in and assist them. And then you have the additional operational centers within the fire department. That Ventura County being a larger county, they actually have a GSA. This county doesn't have one, but they also work closely with them should they have something infrastructure-wise where the general services area would either support or need to take the lead, and then the regular county offices. They also have a couple special districts and non-governmental offices down in the bottom right. They have a military base, but they work with Red Cross, as do we. And I can't recall what NVVC stands for. Next slide. So back to communication. I don't want you to jump ahead, but the event that occurs, there's the initial response from public safety. Public safety notifies the county OES duty officer. I want to emphasize county. And that county OES duty officer, and actually let me just step back. Excuse me. You saw our chart of staff. Now, our OES does not have people full-time working in the OES. They go off shift during different hours. So most of the larger places, and the state does a very good job with this, they have a full-time duty officer. So anytime there's a hazard, there's somebody there, they're in place, they can start activating and doing notifications and working on preparedness. Obviously, we do not, because we do not have the staff. But the initial response goes to the OES duty officer, which would either be Sergeant Whitney or Lieutenant Hubbard or a designee. They would do an assessment, begin notifications. When you see VC alert, that's just Ventura County alert. We'll talk about that. That's a pamphlet. They have a whole pamphlet basically on how they alert the public with what's going on with an emergency event. They do an operational area coordination call, meaning they contact any other entities within their area that they would need to respond or address the emergency. And then if needed further, they'll do larger calls into the state where they would ask for additional resources. They would establish their section chiefs within their OES, or excuse me, within their EOC. They would conduct briefings and basically execute duties and manage the event out of there. The far right, it just talks about the duties of the operational area emergency operations center, all those things we currently do, and the few things that we don't do well, we've already made some improvements on, specifically with notifications and communication. The Sheriff's Office started a Twitter account about a month ago. We have two separate ones, one for the Sheriff's Office. We had been relying upon Nixle and local internet media for notifications. We have a Twitter account for the Sheriff's Office, which is more crime issues, and we also have a Cali OES Twitter account that will start pushing information out on that. We have utilized Facebook as well. The Sheriff's Office has a Facebook account, but we found with Nixle and Twitter, those tend to be a little quicker. And I know that, with an aging population that we have in this county, some of them are reluctant to use social media, but it does allow somebody, easy access to information that we can push out quickly and in short notes, meaning Twitter. And I can tell you, I'm not a big social media person, but I was able to operate Twitter, and if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's pretty easy. Next slide. So we're going to talk about OES staffing options. I'm going to bring up Lieutenant Hubbardy and the sheriff to talk about these. Obviously, please pay attention, and those OES costs do not involve the sheriff's costs. Those are not included in there. But what I'd ask you to pay attention to is the bottom items as far as what work's going to be done, because those are the questions that we were tasked with by the chair of the board as far as questions relating to animals and communication and public information, because I know that was also something that the board wanted to talk about.
Looking at option number one of two, this is staffing to a more robust level, similar to what we had prior to the economic downturn 6-7 years ago. The one thing that we found that was very important is the recognition of a civilian OES manager. That really actually takes the place of the sergeant, who we're using and abusing pretty good, stretched between all the other duties he has as well. That would free up the sergeant to take care of the dispatch duties and the radio communications, vehicle fleet, and other assigned duties. This civilian OES manager would be a full-time position that would be in the EOC doing the planning, the training, everything that we've been unable to do for many years based upon the reduction of our staffing. The program assistant positions is a clerical position. They're the ones that are going to support the operation. As you see in the bubbles below, public information officer duties, which is important because the board has made it very clear that they want more communication, and having someone dedicated to public information working with the county PIO is critical, whether it's in the middle of an emergency or just day-to-day basis, talking about tabletop exercises, community outreach, the ability to go out to more public meetings, having those staff available to do that, the alert morning and the project management, along with animal services liaison and the education and training. Most importantly, or equally importantly, is the grants, planning, and finance, which, with more staff dedicated to that purpose, the ability to go out and seek grants for funding that would not be general fund reliant is a big plus for us, because currently we're only utilizing 2 grants right now, and that's for equipment. It is not paying for salaries.
Could you tell me how much the budget is for the current OES structure?
Sure, you have that information. I did not bring that with me.
Lieutenant, while they're looking that up, just to confirm, here on your program, assistant, the PIO, that is not a sworn position. That's not departmental PIO, is it?
Okay. No, it's not. The sworn positions is the captain and the lieutenant. Okay. Everything from down below would be like the Ventura model, where it's civilian ran. You're not paying safety. It's not peace officers.
Okay.
Captain?
I've got it, sure. You can go back to the slideshow. The current general fund contribution for OES is $179,845. Last year it was $87,710.
What was it again? 179?
179,845.
That was just the general fund?
Correct.
Is that what we're using in all these options, is the general fund? Or the overall?
That'll be up to the board and for us to discuss, but yeah, we don't.
But I mean, what I'm trying to do is compare the cost, like what are we spending now? So the 179 is the overall cost?
Correct, and it's paying for parts of employees. It's not paying for entire employees. That's part of.
Okay.
But there are 2 grants that are supplementing OES as well, the MPG and the Homeland Security grant.
Are those reflected in those 180,000?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Is any part of the 180,000 financed by those grants?
No.
Okay.
And those are not paying for any equipment, just to be clear. The general fund contribution is not paying for any equipment.
Next slide. Option 2, a reduction of another option is taking out the lieutenant position, still having the sworn captain, supervising and overseeing from an administrative perspective, still has your civilian OES manager, which we find to be the most critical position in this situation, and also still running with the same program analysts to get those various tasks done at a little bit reduced cost. Sure.
The program assistants are there to do everything, get the training going, and have the ongoing public awareness. Again, the PIO, the early warning systems, it needs to be something that's consistent. We've been lacking in that for years. We were lacking with that even prior to the Butte fire, back when Clay Hawkins was there, back in 2002, 3, and 4. This is, from what we saw in the models in Ventura and Santa Barbara County, these people are full-time employees that are consistently getting prepared and doing trainings with department heads, other departments, and the county, Red Cross, the whole gamut. This needs to be done so that when we do have that disaster, we're prepared. Bill put it, and you guys agreed, that when you have a plan, if you don't practice the plan, it doesn't do you any good. So that's part of this full time.
One thing I wanted to add also, it just brushed over when you're saying animal liaison. One of the duties that these animals will be doing is establishing for an example, for animal services, having pre-designated ranches for when we are going to have to evacuate animals. Having that in place and going out and talking to the Cattlemen's Association and other property owners that may not have stock, but they have the property and the fences to be able to relocate animals that we have to evacuate out of a disaster area. That would be one of the jobs that a program analyst would do. There are so many meetings that take place locally and at the state level that that OES personnel need to go to. And we make some of them, but we can't make all of them just because we just don't have the numbers. We do attend the fire chiefs meetings monthly, water districts for the dams, going up to Sacramento and with OES regional meetings. There are so many other meetings that these analysts can take the place, so a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain doesn't take time out of the day to go to these meetings that these analysts can attend and report back to what the substance is. Sometimes the meetings are productive. Some are just information saying nothing's changed since last month. But you don't know until you're at the meeting. So it's important to make those meetings. And again, having these program assistants, they're basically our field workers. They're the ones that are going to be in the building, but they're out in the field also taking care of a lot of the public outreach and meeting with the citizens and various civic groups.
Can I add one other comment to that slide? Those program assistants as well would be taking a role during an EOC activation where they would be specifically trained to fulfill one of the requirements in the ICS structure within the EOC. Go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. So these are the recommended qualifications for a civilian OES manager. We discussed the salary range of $75,000 to $85,000 with a bachelor's plus experience and or a person that's a certified emergency manager. We're looking for 3 years of responsible and administrative experience in the area of public safety, emergency services, and or preparedness, with included a minimum of 1 year of supervision. The experience must also include report writing, public speaking, program management, and emergency operations center. This civilian OES manager will support countywide emergency management programs, include managing various grant programs, disaster assistance programs, development of emergency management plans, training, and exercising. The manager would also be responsible for developing and maintaining effective working relationships at all levels, which includes with all the other departments within the county. Serves as a liaison between the OES and various government agencies during preparedness, response, recovery management, and hazard mitigation. And of course, the person must be willing to work evenings, weekends, be available in the event of a disaster, and will be required to serve on a rotational basis 24/7 as a duty officer the OES duty officer, and must be able to work effectively in a high-stress environment and extended hours during emergencies. Okay, and these were other costs that we came up with that would be associated to running an OES program. The 2 OES operations vehicles, similar to what you saw from Ventura County, and then a third vehicle, which would be the administrative vehicle that would be used for each of the assistants if they were going to a meeting out of county or in county and they needed transportation. Computers would be asked for 6 tough books. You saw the Ventura County and the Santa Barbara County EOCs. Every one of their workstations has a computer. 6 would be the 5 the 5 groups inside the EOC, and then a 6th one for our dispatch if we needed to bring them in to communicate directly the information from the EOC onto the computer system for our dispatchers. Office supplies, of course. Emergency clothing would be for all first responders within the department. The field equipment, cones, flares, shovels, flashlights, batteries, and then cell phones for each of the positions that were listed up there. And of course, that's an estimate, and it's rounded at $228,300.
So I just want to get back. So what is our current overall budget for the OES? I got the general fund contribution, but never got the full.
I don't actually recall. I know we have, in addition to the general fund, we have the two grants. They're both right around $124,000 each.
Each?
I think so.
And you get
Is that about right? Sure.
Yeah. Well, Homeland, we only get a portion.
Yes.
Of the
So EMPG is about
250,000 in grants?
EMPG is about 124.
Okay.
Homeland Security is also about 124, but we only get about 37,000 of that because that's distributed to the Gang of Five, Public Health, Angels PD, fire departments, and us.
So you'd say.
And we administer
what's
that.
the rounded figure then would you use for it?
160.
Do you guys recall?
I mean, overall, the entire budget.
Sorry, what's that?
What's the entire budget
For OES?
for OES?
So it was,
It's in here on our computer somewhere. The assessor's office? I mean,
It's 389, or excuse me, 383,962 as of today.
okay, thank you.
okay. Next one. Any questions?
Question, Sergeant, just clarification. The vehicles listed here, are those similar to the vehicles we now have for our lieutenants with the extended communication systems?
It would be similar to the vehicle that Lieutenant Hewitt currently drives.
Okay.
But we were actually talking about expeditions is what is quoted there. He drives an Explorer. The expedition just because you need more.
To our fleet specifically for OES?
Yes.
Okay.
And then just to clarify, the total OES costs in option 1 and option 2 include both grant funding and general fund?
No,
Or is that just
that's
general
just the, what would be the general fund for the.
And that's the total,
Positions.
not additional?
Yeah.
Sure, you can go back to option 1 on the slide.
Yep.
So you'll see there's a low and a high range. You'll see there's a low and a high range in that red box. That does not include the sheriff's cost, because, but that does include the captain, the lieutenant, the civilian manager within that range, and the program assistants. We're trying to drive those program assistant jobs down a little bit because we have some other staff in the sheriff's office, which this was a complicating factor, that aren't making very much money. So we had to carefully decide how much to pay certain folks.
These
This
are
also-
full-time positions?
Yes.
Yes.
They're full-time, not shared duty responsibility of the existing sheriff's department or all employees?
This was what was built outside of existing to do it right.
And again, remember that those total OES costs do not include the front line for the equipment. There's going to be equipment costs, the vehicles, the computers,
Sherry, would you move to the next
office
slide?
equipment. Those will be some one-time costs to get this program back up and running here.
And those are the costs listed at the final slide?
Yes.
So we don't have any of that equipment now that we're using?
No, ma'am.
What do you use?
Can you go back to that?
Right now, Lieutenant Hubbard has I don't know what year his car is, but it doesn't have any equipment other than our typical radio and red lights and siren. Doesn't have it. We don't have anything that has this equipment right now.
So the OES monies we've gotten in the past haven't bought cones or flares or shovels and Nomex overalls or any of those kinds of things?
They had bought some suits in the past that had long since expired. There is some equipment that we have up at the airport, but none of the items that are here, and they're related more to hazardous materials and older equipment. So no, this is all new stuff.
Did you guys, when you talk to these different agencies and other experience you've had in the past, get an idea of how much grant funding is out there? Because I do like the idea of having, somebody who's, if they're really good at going after grants, usually you're successful if that's what you're doing all day. If you're good at it, you're going to bring in some money. I'm wondering what kind of success other agencies have had.
Some of them get a base allocation from Homeland Security and EMPG that's significantly larger than ours already, and that's important. But can I tell you about grants real quick? When OES originally came over, post 9/11, there were a ton of grants out there. And those grants, the restrictions on those and the accountability on those was way different than it is today. And the availability of grants was significantly different. The grants now are much more restrictive. A lot of them force you to outlay costs up front only to get reimbursed. So my suggestion to the board would be don't rely upon grants. That's part of the problem with the sheriff's office overall, and specifically this division. We became too reliant upon grants, and when the grants went away and the economy shrunk, it killed us. So I would encourage the board to not be so reliant. If there's a good grant and we see it, we'll go after it. We'll utilize our business manager and these folks.
Well, especially you can, these equipment costs that you're looking at here, or additional equipment, that's what grants, are really good for too, is, one-time equipment costs and that type of thing, where you don't, you're not relying on the continuing grants coming in to pay for staffing, for instance. That's a really tough one. When you have grants paying for staffing, it's, that's hard, I know. But, definitely with the grants, you can cover a lot of the other expenses besides the ongoing staffing costs.
Captain, question. With these programs, do you have a timeline for acquisition, phasing in equipment, purchasing? It's going to be done over a period of years or months or immediate expenditure? What's your plan?
So if the funding was put in place, we would obviously have to start working with human resources immediately to create the 2 job descriptions. Can you bump back, Sherry, to either program option? We would have to create the civilian OES manager position within the county system and the program assistant. I'm sure human resources would have a lot of input and some advice and ideas on that. We've already spoken to them preliminarily, just to let them know we were going to be presenting before the public and the board today 2 new positions that weren't on there. It was advance notice that we may need some help, but it was also a matter of courtesy. And so we would have to recruit, obviously, those positions. I can tell you that civilian OES manager, Lake County did a recruitment for that position. They paid roughly $85,000, and they were able to grab somebody from within the state of California that had the qualifications. They had some success. I would want HR to tell us what they thought about that price range as far as the ability to recruit and do some research so that, they weren't relying entirely upon what we found out. To give you an estimate, it would be easier to hire these folks, I think, than it would be for us to hire our sworn staff. So I'm going to guess, probably 6, 8, 10 months to get this up off the ground from the time we're funded.
And you're talking about, if I added up my numbers correctly, about an additional $530,000 from the general fund to fund, I think, option 1 or option 2.
So are you, and can I ask how you came up with that number? Are you subtracting the current general fund contribution from what we're saying the total OES costs are?
Yeah.
Okay, and are you talking about just staff or staff and equipment?
I'm talking about, if you look at the option 2, so that's an additional, so I subtracted it out to 179 roughly $300,000 is the figure I used there for that. And then I added the equipment costs into it.
Okay. The problem with that, Supervisor Wright, I think you're assuming that existing staff is going to go into that model. What we're proposing is new staff, not existing staff.
Right. Well, I was only using the numbers that I was given. So if you have an overall cost, that would be great.
Okay. So depending on the salary range and the numbers of staff, we would come back to the board with the final budget for this program. But I want to make sure you understand, we're talking about existing new staff, so you're not going to want to subtract the current general fund contribution towards this.
Right. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but what I'm trying to do is for the next board coming in, I'm actually trying to find this out, not for myself.
Sure.
But I'm just trying to understand how much the ask would be overall for this program.
Sure.
For the general fund.
Your safest bet would be to select an option and decide upon that larger amount, so the $485,000. Can you move to the equipment? And then adding whatever pieces of equipment the board chooses to supply us with to that $485,000.
Gotcha. So just go with that. I see what you're saying. Don't factor in this amount here. Forget about the existing.
I think that would be a safe bet. Now, if we can find efficiencies within there,
sure,
we would absolutely do that. But I would not try and shortchange this. We've done that in the past, and it's created some problems when we've taken on other departments.
Okay. So 475 plus the 228.
So in this evaluation, it looked like you looked at both the administrative model, I'll call it through the administrator's office and the sheriff's office. So why the sheriff's office?
What we found in talking to folks, when it's under the CAO's office, it tended to have some more political problems than when it was under the sheriff's office. You tended to have people inserting political opinions into emergency decisions, which is a kind of a bad combination and a bad recipe. You did hear from a couple members of the public today that talked about, the sheriff being accountable to folks. You also, generally speaking, county administrative offices tend to not be heavily trained up front on emergency management, whereas law enforcement and public safety does. And what has happened in the past, and I'm not going to say this was with some of the agencies we've visited, but if you have an emergency manager from outside of an organization trying to tell folks that are actually involved in the day-to-day work of managing the emergency what to do, and there's a conflict, you have two different departments arguing, and nobody's clearly in charge. And to that extent, and I can recall, my time here too, during an emergency, there's no time to argue. There's no time to have politics and back and forth. And I think when you have a major emergency event, if you have that under an agency or a department that routinely manages emergencies, I think it's a more seamless, efficient model, and you don't end up with politicizing what resources are sent where and how that event is managed.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Department. Good job, Sheriff.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Comments?
It was a very good presentation. The question I have is that in 45 days, we're going to have 4 different supervisors. So it's probably important that we allow them to make any final decisions regarding this. As I understand it, this is a program that was created by Sheriff's Department, and this is a communication to answer questions and to get input from the board. So this probably, if there's decisions of approval of one program or the other, then perhaps that part of it should be tabled to the new boards in place. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill Winhold again. So what you've seen this morning is some very detailed, accurate, well-thought-out information put together by the Sheriff's Office regarding the current state of affairs. There's been comment about how things used to be, and I'm part of what used to be. I can tell you that when emergency services transitioned from the CA's office to the Sheriff's Office, there was a fleet of emergency vehicles that were at the disposition of emergency management. The team was collaborative, they were communicative, and they coordinated activities with multiple departments. This county had an outstanding reputation across this state and other states on how we managed emergency services for this county. This county was recognized by Cal EPA and FEMA for the development of their hazardous materials programs. And today, you have nothing. If you've read the after-action reports from State OES and from FEMA, they've been pretty poignant about the issues that needed to be addressed by this county, by this board, to be better prepared for the next event. So you have the presentations here about maintaining the current management structure within the Sheriff's Office for Emergency Services. I'm encouraged that they're proposing that they dedicate staff to manage emergency services. They've kind of been hamstrung and actually were kind of set up for failure over the last decade, that they tried to do emergency management services with peace officers. And from the beginning, a police officer is taught not to function as an emergency manager. Their crime prevention, their criminal investigation, they're focused to act as independent agents to take command and control of an event. They're not focused on developing a team. They're not focused on sharing all the information they have with other parties, because part of their background is to keep information back that would give a criminal an advantage or compromise an investigation. They respond to more emergencies than many other folks do. So they have the emergency response background, but they come from a different focus than emergency management.
30 seconds.
If you bring folks in now as proposed with them, you're going to get a new breed, a new focus on emergency management and not law enforcement. And I would encourage you to consider that, whether it stays under the Sheriff's Office or goes with another county department. But you have some interesting decisions to make and a lot of responsibility here to move this county to the next event. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Any other public comments?
I have to agree with what Mr. Winhold said. I'm happy to see that there is dedicated civilian staff in here. Mainly what we saw during this emergency was the response occurred in a very short period of time, and we will have to deal with the recovery for years. And so where I have seen a lacking is someone who can coordinate and be a liaison for that recovery piece. So I would hope that a civilian OES manager could do that. While I agree with Captain Macedo, it would never be the OES staff that would actually be involved in doing the work in departments. There is a mechanism there to be a support to those departments, to all of our departments, to make sure that we are all privy to what's out there in terms of grants or other available services that we might not know about. And that's kind of what I've seen has really been missing. And so I like the idea of not having the sworn staff because that tends to be, it's just a different, it's a different take on the process. So I do think that tends to be more of a response centric response, and as opposed to that recovery piece, which is where we are definitely, and I think we can all agree, lacking.
I just want to reiterate a couple things. The reason for the captain and the lieutenant is because, as Mr. Winholt said, sheriff's personnel are designed to respond to emergencies. We're used to that. That's what we do. That's our job. So to have this in any other department, and again, this is why I believe it should stay within the sheriff's department, to have that within another department, they don't respond to emergencies on a daily basis as we do. That's our job. To have those personnel, the captain and that lieutenant in place, and if you so choose to do just the captain, we'll deal with that. But to have those personnel in place to direct the OES manager and these other assistants, it gives us that foothold because we do deal with those types of situations on a daily basis. And that's why I think it believes it needs to stay within the sheriff's office.
Mike Miller, sometimes county employee, but formerly in my working career, I worked for 3 agencies in the Bay Area and the East Bay. And prior to OES, we had the incident command system, which was led by fire departments. We had a civilian manager, and each department was represented in an EOC, logistics, finance, PIO, whatever person got there first was the commander of the incident until relieved by the department that had the highest authority. So if a flood came and the sheriff or the police chief was there first or their representative, they were in charge of the incident until they were relieved by the next trained person in the area of the emergency. I'll give you examples. 1981-82 floods. Public Works was in the lead. 1989 Bay Area earthquake, Palo Alto, California. Public Works was the lead. The police and the fire worked on higher level stuff, but when it made the call on where we were going to close roads and open roads to facilitate emergency traffic, that relied on Public Works. The bottom line is it was a non-sworn position. Every department had to have 5 levels of training. The department heads had to have all the way up to EOC design from entry level. The division managers had to be able to train to step into that department head role down to first line supervisors. Subsequent to the 1989 earthquake in the Oakland foothills, every agency in California was required to do SEMS training. There was supposed to be a change to the standardization of fire nozzle connections, and every employee still today is supposed to have a basic level course. Then there's a series of continuing courses which you move up through. And still today, agencies in the Bay Area have civilian incident command systems. They also have sheriff incident command systems. But in the case of first person there and the type of emergency, the command structure can change immediately and quickly.
30 seconds.
Just as a couple of follow-on things, in 2001, 9/11, I was working in the city of Livermore, and you'd think, well, how could the city of Livermore be affected by 9/11? We had Lawrence Livermore Lab, and our entire police department augmented the Lawrence Livermore Lab to protect the facility. It's a nuclear federal facility and a weapons lab. The Public Works Department was given 1 hour notice 2 days into it when they were taking every airplane out of the air and telling us every 707 or 737 coming in the Bay Area is going to land at our municipal airport. So we became the lead department at that time. It's called Public Services. I'm just trying to say is before you focus on something that's this way, you should also look at the way other agencies, not just county agencies, operate.
Thank you.
It would be a fair assessment.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comments? Board comments? Okay. I guess I'll just say what I have to say. So my 2 cents is I think that it is important that we have a civilian OES manager, for sure. I believe that under that OES manager, the flow chart should read the during the emergency. I believe the OES civilian manager should work for admin. And in emergency, the org chart would look like under the OES manager, sheriff, BOS, and admin. Not going to cost you anything for the Board of Supervisors. The sheriff has already its staff and its all of its planned for emergencies. So they would just do the same thing they always do anyhow, although wouldn't want to take away any of their funding because they still have to keep up their trainings and equipment needs for an emergency. And then as far as the admin side, the admin, basically the OES becomes the emergency manager at the time through the board chair, which is actually been really great, I got to tell you. And then the admin, as time goes on, OES director is going to go ahead and do those trainings in each of the departments anyhow for the way we operate the emergency. None of that happened. None of it. And so there was a lot of confusion. Like I said before, during the response, the sheriff's office did an amazing job. I think they did better than anybody could expect. But I also believe that there's a whole bunch more to it than just that. And so the response lasted for maybe a week. After that, it became everything else, and everything else was really big too, very big. And so that's kind of, and we're continuing on. So the OES director should have at least a staff member in PIO. And I also believe the OES director should reside in the Emergency Service Center and work closely with the sheriff. Because that's where it starts, really. When you have any type of disaster, that's exactly where it starts. I don't know if you guys know about CDART or a couple of those groups out there right now getting training to be animal evacuation groups. I think that's, it's just a prime example of how we can coordinate all this stuff, but you guys don't have time for it, really. A civilian OES coordinator would have time to be able to make sure that they cover all bases. One of the things that I've seen was even the sheriff's office, they were so busy just trying to evacuate people and trying to make sure that, bringing in the, 46 different other agencies to help out during that first few days. Everybody was overwhelmed, but they held their composure, and they did very good. There was a couple of other agencies that could have helped out, and I think with a civilian OES manager to relieve them of that, they could have done, it would have been a lot easier, and we would have had better coverage. And one of the things that I can bring up right away is the coordination of the fire districts and that we have in the county, and also the water districts. Because one of the things that went out really quick was water up in Mountain Ranch because of a generator, and that took out all their hydrants. So, plus working with PG&E, I know PG&E came in pretty quickly, but it still took time away from the sheriff's department and OES manager. There's no conflict as far as I can see on who gives who orders. For me, that doesn't matter. What matters is getting it done. And the sheriff, his response. There's nobody going to stand in their way for response. Not the OAS manager, not admin, not anybody. Nobody. Because that's what they know. But as far as like the board could just sit back and not do anything if everything is good. So, just need communication sometimes. But admin, there was a lack of training, and so you get a lot of really smart people trying to interject their ideas, and it becomes a little bit confusing, and then that's how things get missed. So, with proper training, which an OES manager, civilian manager would do, then you have better coordination, and it's a more balanced situation. And by the way, it would be way less costly. So, since I've actually right from the get-go, this was my direction that I wanted to do. Or ask, to be done, because I felt that some of us got put into a position where we shouldn't have had to, and now we're here. Luckily we haven't had any disasters, but I got to tell you, it's not going to be long. We have tree mortality, and a fire that happens there, it's done. We're going to be right back in this situation again, and we're going to be doing exactly the same thing we did before. And I'm not, as a civilian, next week or next month or in January, I don't want to see that happen. Not to my community. So, I like the idea of having a civilian OES manager managed by admin, which I didn't think I would ever say, but I'm saying it now. PIO that works with that person. PIO could work with PIO Sheriff's Office, and also a staff person to be able to support them. And then from there, it would be up to the training and the individual departments to assign people to that portion. Just like when I worked for Pacific Bell, way back when, I was a part of the OES for Pacific Bell and statewide, and what we did was in each of our divisions, in each of our departments, we assigned people to take that training, and then it just trickles down like that, and then you go through your you go through your exercises to make sure that you're ready for the disaster. So quite possibly, even if we had it that way during this fire, we would have still struggled again, probably, because it was so humongous. But and I think, considering everything, I think we did great. Could we have done better? Yeah, we could have had a lot less stress, that's for sure. But and moving forward, there are many things that got missed, many opportunities that got missed, and I just don't I don't want to put our county into that position again. I want to make sure that we get all the benefit, and I understand the sheriff's position. That they want to. But I also understand that that the disaster is bigger than just the initial response. And why burden the sheriff's folks with that if they're not going to be involved in it as much? Let an OES director, admin. If you go to Siskiyou County, OES is managed under Health and Human Services. And they just had a 180,000 acre fire a couple of years ago up there. And they did just fine. So, there's different ways of doing it, but the idea is getting a process in place so that we can act. Now, and if you want to wait until the next board, fine with me. But the responsibility is going to be there now and is going to be there then. And when it happens again, I would think that you'd want the best thing to happen for people of the county and the county. Period. So that's my 2 cents.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So I think that appreciate the work put into this, and I think either option 1 or option 2 are kind of the ideal scenarios. And the problem that I have is just the price tag, of course. Dealing with that moving forward as far as the next board goes and the next budget cycle comes up. Where are we going to come up with that additional money is the problem. So I would look for, I think the key ingredient here is having the civilian OES manager, having that as a full-time position, and at least 1, if not 2, people down there in the program assistants helping that person. So what I would look to do with funding, in mind, is a kind of tiered approach where you could roll out something over the course of a few years as hopefully the budget improves. And so you could start off by hiring a civilian OES manager and a program assistant, to begin with, and then fill in the positions over the course of 3 years and try to, because ideally, hopefully as we move forward as a county, we'll be looking out, a little bit more, at least, a couple of years in advance when we're doing our budget cycle. I know we can't get too far out because we don't know what's going to happen, but we need to be planning a little bit farther out in advance. And so I think that's what we need to do with this overall program. So I would stick with the overall goal of option 1 here, and then realize that that's probably not going to be enough money involved unless we end up getting, millions of dollars from the cannabis tax, in which case you can fully fund option 1, no problem. But I would go with planning for option 1 and just kind of implement it over the course of a couple of years as your funding comes available. But start off with hiring as soon as possible a civilian OES manager. I would do that even now with this current board, and I would leave it in the sheriff's office. I think that's fine because the good thing about this is you have with the civilian you have the OES. That separates a little bit from the sheriff's structure. So you have kind of a combination of the 2 approaches. But I do think that the sheriff's, especially in a rural county like this, the sheriff's department is going to be the one that wants to be leading the OES, as long as there's enough support staff. That's the key, is we have to fund the support staff to do the job. Because I don't think it was that they moved OES to the sheriff's department was the problem. I think it was the problem is that you moved them and then you took all the funding away. And so if you don't have the funding and the staffing, sheriff's department, nobody can do anything. So that would be my recommendation for the next board. Or for us to go ahead and hire the OES manager, you know, even before the next board came into existence.
I'd like to recognize the presence of Supervisor-elect Jack Garamendi in the audience. Thank you for coming. I have a question, and I'm trying to figure this out. The civilian OES manager position, as it applies to the presentation made by the Sheriff's Department, I know it does reference recovery, and this is one of the areas I'm very concerned with regarding the Butte fire. Our FEMA requirements, our OES requirements, is that part of that person's duties to assist and administrate that and staying out of the individual departments like we talked about? I don't see that reference in this flow chart, or is that part of this program?
Yes, it's to help each respective entity and or department head go through the recovery process. However, it needs to be done. So that is, it's not to go into the department and actually do the work. Not to say this person cannot do work. Believe me, they will facilitate back and forth with FEMA or Cal OES. And basically, it's to have an expert in place, because as you have department heads turn over, you're not going to have expertise in the field. So you'll have somebody there to walk them through that process that already knows the names of everybody, the paperwork that's required and included. Again, you know, there's going to be probably some training unless we're lucky enough to get an expert. But over time, hopefully, that will build, you know, a transition in as you have turnover as department heads, or even with fire chiefs and whoever throughout the county.
Okay, that would be under the control and responsibility of the sheriff's office, the sheriff specifically, as it comes down listed here.
Yeah, and I think that's where part of the confusion's coming in, is what definition of reporting to and what have you. This civilian manager would be an employee of the sheriff's office that we're recommending and reporting to the sheriff. It's not to say he, you know, his or her daily duties, especially post-event. I would imagine the sheriff would be willing to release that person to go work with people as needed, but they're ultimately going to report back to the sheriff is our recommendation. I realize that's not the entire board's opinion, but that is what we're recommending. Depending on the event and how long that takes, that person may be spending a significant amount of time, say, in public health or public works. But ultimately, they're not reporting. We're not recommending they report to the CAO or that respective department, because they may need to be pulled back depending on what's going on.
Thank you, Captain. That was one of my concerns, just straightening and clarifying that. At this point, I'm undecided. I think I would like to have the new board take a look at this before we move.
So, and under what I was talking about, the OES director is responsible for the as the director for the emergency. They don't report. They report to everybody, not just the sheriff. They report to everybody. They report to admin, they report to the sheriff, and they report to the board of supervisors.
Who's in charge?
When the emergency comes, they become the manager of the emergency. Right? So then they begin working with all of them, not just one. So, because it involves everybody all at once. Okay.
I have a few comments. I believe that this certainly needs more evaluation and discussion on many levels. Even though last week I was told I was on my way out and probably don't care about stuff, I do. So what I see here is that more people need to weigh in on this. It's just not something that the sheriff's department takes care of. And I was hoping that I would hear a little bit more about the sheriff's department talking to lots of different people. Maybe it was done. I'm hearing 3 different departments, and I'm seeing lots of pictures of equipment. But it's really the conceptual idea of what OES is in Calaveras County and what we want it to be. I'm not sure which is the best. I'm not sure if it's the Sheriff's Department, if it's standalone. I need more information. I see a lot of dollars up there. I'd like some financial review of those dollars and see what they truly mean. It's one thing to have the staff and buy some equipment, but it's that day-to-day housing and operational costs, too, that I'm not seeing. I'm wondering, you know, in this, one of the things that catches me kind of funny is the animal liaison. You know, evacuation and shelter of people would be pretty important to me, and, you know, maybe it's people and animals. But that just kind of catches me funny when I look at that up there as kind of a priority or project-oriented thing. We have to look at how we're going to fund this. I mean, we have monies that come in from a couple of grants. We have monies that come in from the general fund. If we say those stay with the Sheriff's Department, are those grant funds still applicable to the Sheriff's Department? Do they need to be moved over to the OES side? I mean, if you took a low cost of what we see there and the various options to what we have in equipment, you know, it's $800,000, if not $1 million, when it's all fleshed out. I think we need to take a look at how we're going to fund that in the future and keep it going forward. You know, I have a gut feeling as to where I think it needs to go, but I don't want to say that. I think it's important that more study continues. Certainly this was always going to be something that I thought a new board would be looking at in 2017, whether we started 3 months ago or 4 months ago, because funding is critical to whatever we do here with OES. So I'd look for more information and more study and more people involved in the process. I think admin needs to be involved in the process. The auditor controller needs to be involved in the process. You know, Bill mentioned some very good things. I mean, we have, you know, we had an excellent history and reputation at one point with OES in the county. And utilizing those resources and that information going forward would be very helpful. We have to have equipment. Is it still good? Is it just sitting in an airport hangar rotting? We have new stuff in the Sheriff's Department. I mean, there's just all sorts of stuff I have questions about, and I didn't get them completely answered today. So I think more information, more study time needs to go into this particular thing. It's a lot of money. And $1 million to get it going, and how to keep it going is going to be something very important for that grant planning and finance division over there.
Well, I just want to emphasize that I do believe that regardless of all the options and the overall program, I think we should be looking at hiring a civilian OES manager as soon as we can. You know, we really need that position. And I don't care if it's in admin, I don't care if it's in sheriff, I don't care if it's in health and human services, but we need that position to exist full-time here, immediately, as far as I'm concerned. So hopefully the new board can tackle that quickly in all the chaos that will ensue in a few weeks' time.
I mean, I agree. I think it needs to be a dedicated individual. You know, I'm not sure about the title, the pay, the whatever, but a dedicated individual to it.
Well, I agree. Actually wanted to do it in April, but here we are in December, or near December. So.
Well, I definitely see the need for hiring a OES manager. I have a tendency to agree with Supervisor Wright right now. We should have been doing this a while ago, hopefully, and that might be a step in the right direction, maybe even for this board. But the new board needs to weigh in on it. I agree with Supervisor Ponte. We're talking $1 million by the time we're done here.
So the existing structure right now has the OES position is within the Sheriff's Department, right?
Yes.
And that's an empty position, or it's a part-time position?
They got a couple of people working on it.
Right.
Yeah, that's shared duties.
Sure, that's what it is. So, I mean, so that's good, but, I mean, what if we just,
Start off by hiring an OES director.
allocated the funds with this board to hire, that position full-time?
I'd like to hear from the sheriff and the captain on that.
Yeah.
If that's the board's wishes, we can certainly start down that path. I think we need clear direction from the board on who that OES director is, what department that person is going to work under.
Well, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. You know, we have temporary job descriptions in place. We can certainly start working with human resources. I just want to caution the board, and Supervisor Wright, I think your idea of incrementally going through things is sound judgment fiscally. Emergency-wise, though, I would just be very cautious about underfunding the issue, because you're not going to see the desired improvement that I think we all hope for. And again, if it's the board's choosing to put this under admin, I think the board and the sheriff are going to need to have further discussion, because that's a considerable issue.
If we could start now, put it under the sheriff, and then let the new board take it where they want. You know, that'd be all right with me. We just need a civilian OES manager in place.
I hear you loud and clear.
You know, as this is an informational item, being brought forward by the Sheriff's Office, it would be something, of course, that would need to be brought back before the board for consideration for actually a position, the cost of that position, A through E steps. I'm assuming it would probably be a mid-management position. So there needs to be some ferreting out along with HR on this issue. But once again, I just want to remind the board this is an informational item.
Assistant CAO Moss, would we have a timeline for that to happen? An estimated timeline?
Oh, that's really clearly up to the board as to when you would want that brought back. I would recommend that you would, if you're going to bring this back, that it would at the soonest, it would be in your meeting in December.
And I also wanted to caution, I don't want you to think, Supervisor Wright, that there's money sitting in the Sheriff's Department that's not currently being allocated to staff. It's already being paid. That money is already paying for staff, so it would be in addition to.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
It would be an additional.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if we decide as a board to go ahead and recruit and fulfill the civilian manager position, would that need a budget adjustment?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know we're up for final approval on budget.
And I think the thing that's also very important to understand is it's going to take time to recruit for that position as well. So that's an open recruitment.
I guess the question is are we going to get away without having a civilian OES director? Are we going to not do that?
Well, I think we're pretty much in agreement that we need one.
I mean, even a new board that comes in, do you think they're not going to do that?
I don't think I'm going to respond to that question. I don't know who's going to be on the new question.
You're right about that. Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, we can do that. Anything else you guys want to add? All right. So let's break for lunch for an hour.
So we'll be back at
Be back
1:45.
at 1:45. All right. Welcome back from our lunch break. And now we have,
Item 3 is from Public Works. It's a study session to identify options and direction for staffing and funding of disaster recovery programs with consideration of a disaster recovery response division. Receive, discuss, and recommend actions.
Jeff Krovitz, Public Works Department. These ideas have been discussed over the last year, at least the last year, since the Butte fire. And I was requested to respond to a presentation on how better to respond to disasters by Chair Edson. And tried to bring this forward a month and a half ago, and we were asked to postpone so we could meld the presentation with what was done by the Sheriff's Office this morning. So I guess that's appropriate.
I'm interested.
Yeah, good. A month and a half ago, I didn't expect that we were going to be faced with a majority of a new board, new people in your positions. So that's going to make this even more difficult than it's been to date. So let's get into this. I provided a staff report to try to give a general picture of where the Public Works Department is at. In the last month and a half, I've received more information due to continuing progress with some of the programs, meetings that I've had with Cal OES and FEMA with Chair Edson, where more information was provided to us. And so I'll try to kind of correct a couple of things in the board packet as we move into the study session. So purpose of the study session, discuss potential strategies for implementing disaster recovery programs. I don't think I have to remind you of what these disasters are, but I will for those people who are tuning in on television. We have the Butte Fire, which has a number of programs for recovery. The Butte Fire burned landmass approximately 10% of the county, approximately 8 or 9% of the county-maintained road network, destroyed somewhere between 550 and 600 homes, over 1,200 structures, not to mention the damage that was done to other entities beyond the social services, the effect to water systems, fencing systems, and of course it opened up a whole lot of daylight hitting the ground, which encouraged a mass change of ownership in land and land use within not only the county but the burn area, and that's had significant effects on staff. We also are faced with that second disaster, the tree mortality, the county-wide disaster, that basically occurs above about 2,000 to 2,500 feet and goes up well above about 6,500 feet. Above that, it's not as noticeable. And we have, of course, less private lands and county-maintained roads. And I listed a few hazard mitigation grant programs, both current programs that we have accepted grants for, and then future funding opportunities for hazard mitigation. Do want to clarify for the board right now is that these grants are independent of the disaster. Having a disaster declared gives a county or an entity like us or CCWD that's affected by a disaster a leg up, a higher priority for funding, but the purpose of hazard mitigation is to mitigate hazards from potential future occurrences, high likelihood future occurrences. And that's why it's been so important that we not only adopt an EOP that you did this morning, but we also have a local hazard mitigation program that would identify the types of disasters that the county that may be expected to occur within the county in the future. And those disasters identified in the local hazard mitigation program are those that would be eligible for future grants under a hazard mitigation program. So I'm the first to admit that Public Works has had extreme difficulty meeting the current core mission. And I could probably put a period right there and stop, but I'm going to continue, and meeting the requirements of disaster recovery with the existing staff that we have. I think it was a fairly telling slide that you saw this morning presented by the Sheriff's Office when you talked about the number of full-time staff that were staffing Office of Emergency Services starting in the early 2000s to what they are today. You went from 6 or 8 full-time staff to 2 part-time staff now, or that was the staffing level of on the day the fire started. So response, of course, is going to be difficult. Recovery is going to be difficult if you haven't planned for it. So that brings up the question, well, when does recovery start from a disaster? And I've learned this over the last 20 months, actually less, 15 months, because that's how long since the fire. 20 months is my tenure. Recovery has to start before the disaster. If you do not have people in place that understand the structure of disaster, the nature of recovery, the organizations that we are working with, the number of organizations that we must communicate with, the requirements that we must comply with, environmental, funding, matches, then it's as if you were assigned a job in another country where you don't speak the language. You may know your job very well, but you don't speak the language. You've got to learn the language to be able to do your job. And there is a whole language associated with disaster recovery. So we missed that opportunity. We were not ready to recover from these disasters before they occurred. And is that a failure of any given department? No, it's probably a failure of the county as a whole. And it's more a reflection of funding and staffing than anything else. At least that's my read, being not the newest kid on the block, because I'm now, I guess, turning into a tenured department head. Moving on, how is recovery managed? And I think that's a really important question. How do you manage your recovery? Well, you need to have people that know how to recover. They need to have the time to work on the program, and the expectation that existing staff with existing duties are going to be able to perform a recovery program of any size and any magnitude is, I think, an unrealistic expectation. I don't believe that it occurs, and I think that probably everybody here, at least county employees, understand that. One staff member is sick, or one staff member resigns, retires, moves on, and until we can fill that position again, that work does not get done. So, anyway, the last question I really ask, and I don't have answers for all these questions, but I think they're important, is how do you fund recovery? Every single recovery program or grant comes with strings attached. And the strings that comes attached are usually a local match, as well as compliance with the rules of the road, the regulations, the environmental restrictions, and compliance that we have to do when we accept these funds. So that is also part of any recovery. If you don't know where the money is coming from, how do you know what you can do and where are you going to move from? So I've talked a little bit about the disasters. I talked about the first disaster in your board packet, the Butte Fire. I don't think I have to beat that one up. We all have lived it for the last year. And we've had a lot of discussion about the second disaster, the tree mortality. Now, thank goodness that this hasn't fallen entirely on Public Works. Admin has taken on some of the duties to move this program along. The unfortunate thing is that we're in a second tier of funding. It's a 25% local match for the removal of these trees. And these trees are continuing to die, and they're going to die at an increasing rate. And the only thing that's going to stop it is a change of weather. And it's going to be a massive change of weather. But irregardless, if we get, 4 winters in a row of greater than average precipitation, the trees that have been in the process of dying for the last 5 years of these climate change will continue to die over the next 4 or 5 years. So this program is here for a while, and it could be here for a long time. Interesting news that I heard, I reviewed a Forest Service report from a fire in Washoe County that occurred this fall, and that's in Nevada on 395 between Carson City and Nevada and Reno. And it happened on the east face slope of the Sierras, which are east of Tahoe, and it burned several thousand acres, and the cause of the fire was, of course, a Forest Service controlled burn. But what was interesting to me when I was reviewing some of the reports on it is they said that it is unlikely in our lifetimes or the next several hundred years that that forest will ever recover. But they don't have the precipitation to bring it back. So that means that those hillsides are going to be barren, rocky hillsides that may be covered with brush, but they're not going to be covered with trees again. So we've got to accept the fact that we have climate change that will affect our environment in a way that's at least permanent for our own lifetimes. We've got to be able to adapt to that. So the third disaster that I didn't intend or none of us could foresee was what I call tree mortality within the burn. And I'll get to this. This is all in the staff report. Is that we had a bounce back effect within the burn area. The trees that burned and died gave off pheromones. They attracted more bugs that were busily feeding, moving from south to north, migrated into the burn area, and then the trees that survived the burn now are being attacked because the beetles aren't attacking the burned trees, they're attacking the adjacent live trees. So we have a higher mortality rate within the burn area than we anticipated, and that will also continue. It's really the second disaster, part B. Then, of course, the third or the fourth disaster, however you want to count these things, is what I call the lack of county resources. Going into disasters of this magnitude as far behind as we were. I know within my department and the divisions of the programs that I have under my jurisdiction, we were very behind. And first thing, of course, is to try to fill staffing positions so you have a chance to catch up and then take the big items on, get yourself operating legally if possible, try to get your house in order. And then to that, we're going to pile on a few more disasters. Not asking for pity, I took it on. But the bottom line here, and this is the most important thing for today, is that limited county resources to meet disaster recovery demands result in impacts to current county programs and missions, and it delays recovery execution. So I can say that again, it's important, but the bottom line is that current workloads, added workloads due to disaster recovery affect not only what you're currently doing, but your ability to recover. And the recovery programs have a timeline. And their timeline start from the date of the disaster declaration. And your first timeline ends in 60 days. You have a 60-day window with which to start many recovery programs. If you don't meet that 60-day window of starting those recovery programs, you now have been moved out of an emergency response area where you have some programmatic relief from compliance with environmental rules and regulations. So how does one, with purchasing policies and emergency operations and lack of knowledge of funding and things like that, how do we execute contracts with, say, an arborist or a tree removal contract within the first 60 days following a fire to start removing burned trees so that we can kind of foreshorten some of the environmental overhead that one has to do to meet compliance with both NEPA, because you're accepting federal funds, and CEQA, because you're accepting state funds. So that's a near impossibility within that time frame, unless, of course, we had on-call contracts or people in place prior to, and that also seems a little bit silly. One can't do that. So the process is not exactly set up for neophytes, probably the best way to say it. I'd like to give you a couple more examples of effects on current staff for a disaster like the Butte Fire. I'll start with the Road and Bridges Division. Our guys were out immediately. We were called out. We were closing roads. We were providing detour signage. We were assisting the sheriff's office with closures. And in the first 2 weeks, we were cutting down trees that were still burning alongside of county roads so that they wouldn't burn through and fall across the roads, and CAL FIRE still maintained access for their response. So we were out in force. We weren't at the front lines of the fire, but we were providing access for response. Okay? That lasted for about 25 days or so, and then we moved into emergency repairs. And emergency repairs included a wide variety of things. We went out into some private property and protected structures that were likely to flood or be damaged in the aftermath. And we did that through grant programs that were made available to us through NRCS. We did emergency repairs on roads. We did emergency work on drainage facilities because we knew we would take on more rain. We knew we would take on more runoff. We knew we would take on more sediment. And felt that our job is to keep the roads as open as possible. That continued. Actually, it still continues today. But what it meant is that I divided our road staff. 75% of them were essentially focused on the burn area. 25% of them were focused on the remaining part of the county. And so they were responding to work requests, and that was about all that they did for the first 60 to 90 days following the fire. The ones that were out in the field and were doing the emergency repairs or the emergency response were not preparing for winter up in the high country, and you all heard about that, especially Supervisor Oliveira. We did not prepare to the extent that was required because we didn't have the staff to do it. So anything that we do, we're either going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul or vice versa. So it's kind of a conundrum. Another example that I think is really important here is the impact that the fire had on the management, public works management, and our engineering staff. In the first 3 months after the fire, I tried to keep my management staff as focused on our existing core mission programs as possible, and I focused as much on the fire. I figured that made as much sense as anything since they'd been they're long-term employees. They knew what the programs were. They knew where they were going, and I didn't know as much about it. And the fire was going to be new to all of us. So I felt like I was the most expendable management staff to be able to focus on the fire. That was a fairly killing time, a lot of hours put in. And the first, as I say, 3 or 4 months was either in a support role, supporting other departments, Environmental Health Agency, Auditor's Office, FEMA, Cal OES, wanting to tour, helping mission-tasked employees that were coming from Stanislaus or Los Angeles get out into the field without getting lost or shot. So we spent a lot of time doing that with extra hire staff under my direction. In the meantime, my engineering staff was continuing to work on our core programs for integrated waste management. But let's just talk about our CIP, our capital improvement program. And let's only talk about those projects in the capital improvement program that have a value, construction value, of more than $100,000. Okay? I have approximately 20 of those projects in our current to-do list. These are funded with a combination of local funds, state funds, and federal funds. So once again, they're very similar to what we have to do to comply as we do with a recovery program that's a local declaration and a federal declaration. These projects have funding timelines, and the timelines might seem very long, but when you look at how long it takes to execute a public works project, a 10-year timeline to program a project, do your preliminary engineering, and get your environmental approval, they give us 10 years. In some cases, that may not be enough. You can get a 2-year extension, but if you don't meet the milestones for the given process that you're in with these capital projects, with external funding coming in, then the county becomes liable to repay the monies that have been expended to date. Okay? I did a quick look at our 20 projects or 19 projects. A lot of them are bridges, but not all of them. Some of them are Mountain Ranch Road, the sidewalks project out here, the O'Byrne's Ferry Road left-hand turn project. You've all heard about these. The Bridge Preventative Maintenance Program. To date, we've expended about almost $4.6 million on those projects to get them moving towards completion. And you've heard all along about where they are at with completion. You know that Railroad Flat is ready to construct, and we should have another bridge or two next year. But with that type of expenditure and that type of risk, if we miss those dates, we're paying the money back, and we don't have the money to pay it back. We have to execute it. So now we've got recovery here, capital programs here. Where do we live? We live in the middle. So let's talk a little bit about the current Butte Fire recovery programs that Public Works is currently working on. You all already know about the disaster removal program that was done by Cal Recycle through Environmental Health Agency. But the ones that are under our management would be a couple of public assistance programs, one for debris removal trees. Our current estimate is between 15 and 16 million for that program alone. Okay? The match on that, and this is one of the items that I found that is a change from when I first prepared the staff report, is that I listed it as a 0% match. It's actually a 6.25% match. Without legislation from the state, that match isn't waived. I've been told by several people, including people at OES and people within the county, that that match is waived. It's not. That's $1 million in match.
So how did you discover that?
Well, I had a meeting with Cal OES and I asked them point blank.
And before they were saying it was?
I've just heard different conflicting information. And I've never heard the direct answer to the question until we actually sat down, I think it was about 3.5 weeks ago. Wasn't it, Supervisor Hudson? And the local match, even though I've listed them as fixed amounts within the staff report, it really depends on when they occur. The quicker one can do recovery, the lower the match. The longer it takes you to do the recovery, the higher the match to a limit. Okay? And that limit is the most you would potentially pay if you could complete the recovery program within the time frame that you've been allotted, okay, for the given program. So we've got the debris removal trees. We are right now on the cusp of taking out trees. In the last couple of weeks, we've done a number of things. We've declared a disaster, and things are happening with the tree program. I'll talk about that in just a minute. I just want to continue on. The road repairs for about 40 miles worth of road, estimated construction cost, roughly $8 million. The match, 6.25. That's $500,000. The emergency recovery for road repairs, the other half of our roads, a different program managed by Caltrans and Federal Highway, a roughly $11 million program. That's an 11.5% match. That's $1.3 million. We have a couple of grants that we've taken on, these hazard mitigation grants. They total up to about $4.5 million. That's a 25% match. So that's about a $1.1 million. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at a total estimated value for Butte Fire recovery programs within Public Works of about $40 million with a match of about $4 million. Okay? The $4 million and all of these programs, or most of these, the bulk of these programs center around county-maintained roads. Okay? My annual road fund is roughly $5 million. Okay? For everything that we do, and that includes snow removal. So I started looking into, well, how many people do I need to do work? And I think let's move on in. So I'll get into these more in detail. This now deviates from the staff report and moves on. To me, our current highest priority, and this is for Public Works in the county, is the removal of hazardous trees. The hazardous trees are those burned trees that are adjacent to county-maintained roadways that are in danger of falling. They've been standing dead for more than a year and 2 months. They are rotting. Every day they are rotting. They're not continuing to grow. And some of them have started falling. We've heard a number of stories about them. Public Works has taken out 4 or 5 in the last month and a half. We asked our arborist to do a drive-by through the county roads. He identified an additional dozen trees that he feels are in need of coming out immediately. That means that these are trees that have a high potential of falling onto the roadway in high wind or in high rain with saturated soils. Okay? So what are we doing about that? I couldn't get a schedule back from FEMA or Cal OES in terms of when we would get permission to begin removing trees. So we have prepared an RFP for on-call contract to remove these trees because many of these trees are beyond the skill set of my road crews. And the other question is, do we want to dedicate road crews for a number of weeks to removing trees to the detriment of getting ready for winter storms, repairing roads, repairing collapsed culverts that we've been doing for the last 2 years? So we're moving ahead with that. I am very optimistic that we will be having permission in the next 2 to 3 weeks to begin removing trees. We got official clearance this morning from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service that they've accepted the mitigation program for the endangered species mitigation, both plant and animal, and also for the protection of surface waters. We have seen the suggested program that has gone to SHPO from the federal government, suggesting on how we can comply and mitigate archaeological resources, historical and cultural, Native American and historical. So I'm hoping they have a 15-day window to respond. They've had that for 5 days. We have a few problems with the program, but we think we can work through them, and we don't want to slow it down. But in the meantime, we have to continue. We have to be ready and poised to be able to begin removing trees as quickly as we can. To that effect, you know that we've marked, for the most part, 100% of the public trees on the public rights-of-way, about 60% of the private property trees to the limit of the rights of entries that we've received that allow us to go onto the property. We have the contract in place for the arborist and the hazardous tree removal contractor. NEPA approval is pending. CEQA approval we have done. Board declared a local state of emergency in November of 2016 to assist the feds with their NEPA approval and to give Public Works the ability to go out to these on-call contracts and get trees removed if I can't get approval in the very, very near future. And today and tomorrow, FEMA and Calaveras are back out on the roads again, sampling and verifying that the trees that we marked are indeed dead and they've been marked properly. The reaction from today's voyage was that, hey, every single tree that you marked was absolutely correct to 100% level, and there are more trees that are dead out there that should have been marked. So, but since there have been difficulties in getting our approval of our program because the number of trees constantly change due to the various disasters that we have, we will fight that one after we start removal. Okay? So, in terms of the roads, public roadways, that's the FEMA PA, public assistance roads. Roadways have been assessed. Some allowance by FEMA for post-fire recovery traffic damage has been allowed. That's why that program has gone from about a $500,000 program to a $7 to $8 million program. Okay? The public roads, federal highway roads, those are the roads mostly that have yellow lines down the middle of them. Assessment has been completed by the county and Caltrans. Damage assessment forms are in progress. The damage assessment forms, the DAF forms, are required to move the program forward. They have to go to Caltrans. Caltrans reviews those for cost and scope, and then they approve us to move ahead, getting designers and contractors to actually do the work. That's assuming I knew where the match was coming from. The DAF forms slowed down because the extra hire that I had targeted to work on that program got sucked up 100% of his time, actually more than 100% of his time, in the hazard tree removal program. Road repair construction, we are hoping to do the completion of hazardous tree removal program. If I have two contractors out there doing two separate pieces of work, which is the way it would do if I tried to do these simultaneously, and one contractor claimed delay because the other contractor closed the road, or was in the middle of a paving operation, or was dropping trees across the road, then those delay claims would be paid for by the county, and they would not be reimbursed by any of these programs to any effect. So that's a risk I don't feel that I can take on behalf of the county, to put more than one contractor or more than one group of contractors doing different type of work simultaneously out in the field. To be able to do these programs, we need a program manager, we need a staff. So the grant programs that you've heard so much about, the FMAG and the HMGP, those are mitigation. The way those grants were written was to prevent erosion, to highlight the highest areas elevation-wise within the burn area, give them some erosion and sediment control treatments, to prevent them from landsliding and then consequently cascading more damaged soils below them into our creeks, streams, and rivers. This needs a program manager and staff. The program manager and staff for this can be partially funded through the grants, but there's still match to be made. Okay? Moving on. County resources. So the total county has about 500 employees, plus or minus, about $158 million total budget, or about one employee for every $316,000 we're spending. 16-17 Public Works budget, 80 employees, $25.4 million, that's a total program, or one employee for about $320,000. That's about the same. Close enough, I think. Butte Fire Recovery, I estimate 6 employees for 2 years to manage a $35 to $40 million program. That would be a minimum, and that would be assuming that we contract out design, we contract out construction. That's just to manage those resources. So, tree mortality, unknown cost, unknown duration. For today, I'm going to estimate 4 to 8 years. In my board package, I estimated 5 to 10. Doesn't really matter. We currently have one part-time staff, 960 hours, working on grants, even though this isn't funded. How much is this program worth? I don't know. Can I guess? More than the burn tree program, which is at $16 million, because there's more tree mortality along county roads within the county than there are burn trees along county roads in the Butte Fire area. So what that means is if you take a timeline, and I've got a graphic in the board report that talks about the match requirements over time, and you're overlapping Butte Fire recovery, tree mortality recovery, not even talking about anything else, is that you're looking at a total bell curve expenditure of what can be, what I'm estimating today, about $8 million. I estimated about half of that just for Butte Fire recovery. Okay? And so this is more money that we may or may not have, but we have to make some hard decisions. Okay, so I suggested that any effective response has to have a structure, and the structure needs to be staffed with people that know the programs going in, even if they don't know the details of the county, or people that are current county employees that can conceivably be redirected without damage to existing programs that know these programs. So I suggested a director at about a 75%, not necessarily full-time, an administrative analyst, full-time for 2 years, part-time for 1 year. We've estimated an annual staffing cost associated with these things, a deputy director to help direct the work of the individual programs. Again, part-time, be a half-time position for 2 years while these disaster recovery, and this is only Butte Fire, this is not tree mortality, moves on. Then move down to the larger structure and look at the organization in terms of the programs that you're doing. So you've got the roads program that I've already talked about and what the costs are for those, staffing costs. I showed tree removal programs. One of them is the fire trees, and one of them is tree mortality trees that I don't know about. I talked about mitigation grants, and I also included a few other grants that I know Mr. Miller is pursuing as part of the tree mortality program. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, and the slide has been reproduced from your staff report, you can see that the total cost under the roads program, $18 to $25 million, total cost for tree removal, 13 plus an unknown amount for tree mortality, and you look at the hazard mitigation grant program, $4.5 million. Lots of money. So, total salary, total county staffing cost, we approximated about $500,000 per year. Okay? That's recovery. That's on top of Office of Emergency Services that you guys were considering this morning. Total estimated match of about $850,000 a year, and that's going to be for 2 to 3 more years. And again, I reiterate, does not include tree mortality. County staffing, 6 positions. Extra hire may not be the correct title. Extra hire is meant to be a 6-month duration. It's not meant to be part-time year-round. It's meant to be for a short-term relief. We use extra hire snowplow drivers, and we have about 25 to 30 of them, so that when it snows, we're not taking our roads and bridges staff off of their daily duties, yet we're still getting the snow removed. So these would probably be better stated as limited term positions. And we know that when filling positions in the county, if we don't have an existing project job description, it takes longer because job descriptions have to be approved by Board of Supervisors, and that takes time. And so we identified the closest that we could within the Department of Public Works, staffing positions that could handle the type of work that we envision on these recovery programs. So we've got a director, a deputy director, engineering, administrative analyst, three senior engineers, some of them full-time, some of them part-time. And then contract staffing, looking for a project manager only for the road portion, ER and PA, and that was about $143,000 a year. So, again, this is a study session. This is a concept. I will tell you that my department will continue to the limit of our staffing, the limit of our resources to do tree removal. I don't have an idea of where my match is going to come from, but I hope it makes itself clear to me. If the match has to come, I might be coming back to a different board next year and saying I'm having to shut something down.
Come back to Mike. That'd be the guy right there.
So, and this disaster recovery, you know, the argument about whether it would be within OES, whether OES would be at admin or in the sheriff's office, or whether disaster recovery for these types of programs would sit in Public Works, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't. That's less important than the work that actually needs to be done. Are these two mitigation grant programs necessarily in the purview of Public Works? No, they occur on private land. Our mission is the roads that we maintain and the solid waste programs that we affect, the transit buses that we run. They're all part of a disaster recovery or emergency response program. So it doesn't matter where they sit or who staffs them, but we've got to have them staffed and we've got to have the funding identified, the match identified. Are there alternatives? Yeah, there's always an alternative, and I discussed this in the staff package, that you could go with 100% consultant services. However, you would still need a minimum of 5 or 6 full-time people, limited term, but full-time people within the recovery program to meet your state and federal requirements for oversight, for management, for admin, both direct and indirect costs, just because of the size of these programs. Okay? Other alternative, I hate to throw this out, but you can reduce the core mission of the department who has the responsibility, decide what you're going to give up and what you're not going to do. I often refer to this as leaving a baby lying alongside the road. It's a horrible image. It's not one I like to live with. But reduce the core mission and prioritize fire recovery or disaster recovery programs. Third alternative, I don't know. I do know that I am committed to continue these programs to the level of staffing I have available, to the level of funding I have available, and I am not going fast enough. It's about what I have.
Okay. Questions?
So, thank you for putting this together. I know it's kind of a the transition period between boards, so it's kind of difficult. But I do appreciate the information still and the time putting it together. Obviously, you've been thinking about this for a while. I'm just curious, in your study, did you come across another county or other jurisdictions that have done something similar?
What larger jurisdictions do is they take staff that are working on those programs that are essentially nice to have, not necessarily need to have, and they redirect their employees, and they put them into these positions and move ahead, and then hire consultants as much as they can. Fundamental difference, I mean, the closest comparison we could have is Lake County. Lake County burned about 60,000 acres, about a little more than 50 miles of road. they lost 1,000 homes. Their 1,000 homes were essentially two major communities. They didn't lose as many trees, they didn't have as much road, but they have a population of over 300,000 people instead of 45,000 people. So they necessarily have a larger staff. For the tree program, they had been through this before during the Jerusalem fire and delayed in similar fashion to what we did, and kind of got burned by it, and so they were committed in the Lake County fire not to have that happen. They went out with immediate contracts that did not necessarily meet federal requirements because it was more important for them to get the trees out of the way, and they were willing to risk that not being reimbursed for that amount of funding. We don't have that luxury in terms of funding. We have less resources. We have less tax increment paying for those resources, and they have been on a fairly steady decline for the last 10 years. We all know this. I'm not giving you guys new information. And in terms of the other programs, they had at least been through a smaller fire. Lake had been through a smaller fire. They'd experienced it once before, so they went into the Lake fire with experienced staff. And their experienced staff just continued in the next fire. They had another one this fall. It was smaller and it wasn't a clear disaster, but they just continued on. So for them, it's almost as if they have a full-time group that not only helps with response, disaster response, but also is permanently full-time employed in recovery. And I'm assuming once they get past the initial 3-year period of the recovery, then they will move those people back to their home positions, as it were.
And this division, is that how you're envisioning it as well? As a temporary until the tree mortality issue is finished?
My thinking about it is you would start it, you would ramp it up. They would be working on Butte fire recovery because we know we have programs that will fund that, assuming we can identify and fund the matches. And then as money becomes available in the next year or 2 years for tree mortality, then they would roll into that in terms of a funding program. Mr. Moss may be able to speak to that. He might have a different plan.
Well, what I can tell you is that obviously the administrative office excuse me, is currently leading the tree mortality program, as well as 2 of our board members who sit on the statewide task force. There is CDA funding available, which is at 25% county cost, but there's also, if you have a LHMP, Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, adopted into the general plan, then that legislatively might be reduced, that 25%. Probably not to 0, but it can be reduced. Similar like if we had a federal declaration, possibly to 6.25%. So that is going to require legislation. This was a bill that was passed. The initial bill was passed, I think, in 2006 or 2007 that allows for this. So we are working on that. Also, it's important to note that tree mortality is an ongoing gubernatorial declaration. And that means, as an example, we applied for and received approval for $1.7 million. That's just the opening salvo. Because it's an open declaration, unlike the Butte fire, we will continue to go back as we continue to ramp up on the program. So I think that's important to note as well. Also, I've been in touch with our planning director, Peter Maurer, and he did state that it's possible to have the LHMP adopted into the general plan and brought before the board in February of this coming year, so a couple months from now. So I appreciate your work on showing your grasp for the tree mortality, the costs associated with that. It indeed is a long-term disaster. And so with that recognized, we know that we have a lot of work to do. Mr. Miller has been working diligently on several options for tree mortality, including, but not limited to, even doing RFPs for eventual registered foresters to get out and deal with the tree mortality specifically. So With that said, just wanted to bring everybody up to date, so thank you for that opportunity.
Can you give me some updates on the FMAG and HMGP?
Had a series of telephone calls with FEMA and Cal OES, our representatives, in late October and early November. The FEMA environmental branch that does NEPA clearance for these programs asked for additional mapping and additional information. We provided that to them on the time frame, and they said thank you. We asked them for a schedule, and they said no, thank you. But I'm assuming that if it follows the same pattern that the burn tree program went through, it will take them 2 to 3 more months to be able to complete the environmental clearance that would allow us to deploy contractors. So what that program would need specifically would be an RFP to hire a project manager. The project manager could then assist us with the preparation of construction contracts for 1 or 2 or 3 contractors. I would think it would be 1 or 2 or 3 contractors for both aerially deployed erosion and sediment control and land deployed erosion and sediment control, because that's what the grant specified. And then get the right of entries from those targeted high priority parcels and begin the deployment of the program. Again, for every dollar of money expended, 25 cents must be identified. Now, the FMAG program has already made its match just in the preparation of the grant and the donated hours for the exhibits and the targeting of parcels within the program. We have some monies that we have already essentially stored or earned, as it were, in the preparation of the HMGP, but nowhere near $1 million. So you could call it $1 million, you could call it whatever you want. It's 25 cents on a dollar. And there are limitations. I cannot use materials, the ground trees that came out of that would come out of the burn tree removal program as mulch, because they've been paid for by one federal program and then applying to another federal program. I can't use them for that. Okay? And the same thing would probably be true if we were actively doing tree mortality removal and grinding of that material. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't use material that are produced on a regular basis out at the landfill and at Red Hill and at Wilseyville with green waste programs.
A real quick comment on the HMGP, different than the FMAG, is that, as explained to the board several months ago, this is kind of one of those spend-as-you-go line of credit programs, if you will. So you don't have to spend the full $3 million with a $1 million match. What you do is you identify your assets and what you can spend for your deductible, and then you go ahead and spend the grant monies behind it. You have 3 years to do that program.
So it's safe to say they're still moving forward. It's just a matter of, just working out the paperwork. But it's happening. It's just moving slower than we'd all like as usual dealing with these types of situations.
Well, we're all learning as we go along, and it's not just staff members here at the county. It also includes Cal OES and FEMA. They have never done a burn tree removal program to the level that they've done for NEPA clearance on this one. And state laws, CEQA laws, that have brought forward a requirement for a consultation with local Native American tribes, whether they are nationally recognized or not nationally recognized, that's new to them, completely new to them. And it took them longer to figure it out. But as I say, we've gotten through it, and hopefully the next time it's easier.
And then as far as the RFP goes for the program manager, are you waiting until final clearance on the go-ahead on these programs, or are you going to do that now?
Once again, the big issue for me in Public Works is that the only money that I don't believe that I have any monies in Public Works that will allow me to make that match, because the mission of Public Works, it's either an enterprise fund or it's federal funding for transit or it's a combination of state and federal funds for roads. None of these falls within the purview of doing erosion and sediment control as hazard mitigation on private land.
Right.
So, once again, in spite of what Mr. Moss said, that it's a pay-as-you-go and it's a line of credit, we're still, if I hire a project manager, and let's just say that it's going to be a $180,000 contract for 2 years. When I bill the federal government $180,000 for that contract, they would return to me 75% of that money.
Right.
The other 25% has to come from somewhere.
Yeah. So, and I understand that you don't have the money in the budget.
It's not even a budget; it's an omission. I don't have those types of funds that are at the discretion of my department to spend on that program.
So
it has to come from another location.
So, but if you come back to the board and explain it, it looks like we need that in order to do this work, right? So,
right.
I don't know what the next board will do, but I know I would certainly, as a D2 supervisor, I can't say what Karamindy will do, but I mean, this is a critical point, and it's not a vast sum of money, so I would hope that you'd be able to bring it forward to the next board and explain the situation and hopefully at least get funding for that small component of the overall program.
We've actually been trying to get it since March or April.
Well, was that a part of the agenda item that was brought forward to us? We've talked about it several times.
We've talked about it, and I tried to put our matches into our annual budget, but I was asked to pull it out to try to deal with recovery budgets independently. And so we haven't really dealt with recovery budget anywhere else. At least I haven't been involved.
Well,
so
I mean, that would be my advice is to bring that forward to the board, work with, I mean, if you can't, obviously this is wrapping up now. I understand things are in transition, but, if you have the ability to work with the incoming D2 supervisor on this, I think the rest of the board would at least, consider doing something like this. And I think it's such a critical component. If it's going to hang up the HMGP or the FMAG program from going forward, it seems critical that we fund it. I mean, I would love to see this come up to our next board meeting, but I don't know if that's possible. So.
Yeah, and again, to me, I've got several RFPs or several public bids that have to come in front of the board. I have an on-call contract for emergency tree removal. I've got an RFP for a program manager to manage the rest of the burn tree removal program going in front of the board. Then I've got a program manager for the roads recovery, PA and ER. And after that, I feel like I then am free to go after the FMAG HMGP, because those are the order of priorities.
Why can't we do all those in one board meeting? Just have like agenda item 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we just do them. They're done.
Because it takes approximately 1 to 2 weeks minimum of staff time to develop each of the RFPs.
How many hours?
1 to 2 weeks on the general write-up, and then we start the circulation process.
For one of these RFPs?
Yeah. So, again, limited time, limited resources.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Just trying to figure out the stuff, so I appreciate it.
Well, just let you know that Arborist actually was available in May, and I wanted to put them in there, but it was held up because of IRS issues, and so we could have had them then, but here we are.
Right. Yeah.
You have to decide how you're going to do it. If you're going to try to do it with limited term hires, county defined employees, you have to have these positions that match current descriptions if you're going to try to do it somewhat quickly. Otherwise, you go through that process, which is develop the position, develop the description, bring it to board, go out, process a hire.
I'd like to also add that during the recovery process, you'll notice that environmental health had teams of people helping them. They had teams, and through CalRecycle, and they had lots of contractors, and Public Works had one person.
Why is that? Is it different? Is it because of the type of industry?
No, it's not. It was the program. The CalRecycle program, which is a program that had been previously established for state-declared disasters, specifically fires, state had made the determination that when you have burned structures, that's the first thing you have to take care of and get rid of. It's a public health hazard. So Office of Emergency Services, California Office of Emergency Services, have predefined teams with experience that arrived here when the fire was still burning. Because I remember being in the initial meetings with CalRecycle and Mr. Boser.
Kind of a priority.
It was a huge priority. And so what they do is they arrive and they've got a management team in place who has done this before. They have 2 or 3 contractors that they've worked with, and they say, you're our one because you have the time, the staff availability. And they're able to put that in place and move. But I don't know if you ever went into any of the D-Rocks, the one that they temporarily established in Angels and the one that came here in San Andreas, but you saw that they were staffed 40, 50 people.
So there's just nothing like that for Public Works?
Not for these types of projects. These types of recovery programs, they're assumed by both state and federal government that existing staff can handle, or we are flexible enough and have enough available resources that we can develop the proposals that meet federal, state, and local purchasing guidelines.
I think he's just being nice, actually. They didn't want to give him the staff and so he didn't get it. He could have built the staff for it, could have got the reimbursement, and they didn't do that. So that's the way it is.
Who's they? Cal OES?
Well, no, actually, Jeff was asking for help, but he didn't ask the right way. He didn't know how to ask. Didn't ask the right way, so he didn't get the help. And so if you don't ask the right way, it's like you said earlier, it's kind of like a different language, and didn't ask the right way, and he wasn't able to get it.
So asking Cal OES or FEMA or both?
Whomever, yeah, wherever the program can come from. I mean, we could get, don't you remember when OES came in, what can we do for you? And then you just ask the right questions, and they will help you. If you don't know how to ask the right questions, then, they're not going to.
And plus the CalRecycle program, I mean, has been developed over the years.
CalRecycle is already in place.
To get to this point where they're like, oh yeah, we know how to do this, let's go do it. Whereas it doesn't seem like there's anything in place to help.
So like
but every one of our departments should have, in my opinion, had built a group of folks to handle the Butte fire, and so that they can operate their own department separately. And Jason's department is actually, I think, is the only one that did.
And so, getting back to the very, unless you're right now.
Yeah. I'm going to have questions, but go ahead.
So on this division kind of reshuffle or format here, the Disaster Recovery Response Division, do you envision this thing happening continuously? Or is it like in the case of a disaster, then this is the program we set up, and it looks like this, and it needs this level of staffing, and the staffing comes from X, Y, or Z. Is that kind of what you're saying, or is this a permanent?
That will be for the next 8 years. Actually,
It's Supervisor Wright. The only way I can answer it is that we've talked a lot today about emergency response, and we've talked a lot about. Actually, we've talked about a Office of Emergency Services and responding to a disaster, be it a fire where you're doing suppression, and then as soon as the fire is out, then you begin recovering from your suppression activities to repair the damage, and moving along. And that program for fires is predefined, pre-set up. There are people that are trained and they are mobilized as soon as the fire reaches a certain size and a lack of containment. So that BARC crew, the ones that prepared the 150-page report on the damage to the structures and the structures that were still to be hit and where our highest intensity burns were and where our most likely erosion problems were going to be, they were out here within 3 or 4 days, and they were starting their work immediately. So they were funded, they were trained, they had the tools and equipment, and they're ready to go. You cannot separate, in my mind, recovery from a disaster from response to a disaster. And so you don't necessarily have to have a program the size of that. The size of the program is completely dependent upon the damage and the funding to recover from the damage. But when we show you that in this county, for every $300,000 you're going to spend, you're going to need at least one staff person babysitting that per year. That's not a bad rule of thumb. So in my former life as a consultant, running a single project that had a construction value of $35 million, that wasn't too bad. I could manage that with a staff of 4. But once I started getting above $75 million, that was more than one manager can handle. So I think to answer your question is that you cannot segregate recovery from an emergency response network. And whether you have people in place, you need to have people that are familiar with how to do the work and have the tools to be able to do the work, and then the flexibility to build your structure the way an incident command structure is built. And the Sheriff's Office talked about it today again and again. These are time-sensitive recoveries. And we don't have time to learn on the job. We don't have time to staff up to do the job if we don't have processes in place. I mean, Supervisor Edson, wanted to hire a forester to manage burn tree removal and then jump into hazard tree removal, tree mortality issues. We have no position at the county that has that description. We can't hire it. Why not? Why isn't there emergency positions for response and recovery built into our system so that we're not taking...
Actually, I wanted to hire him as a contractor, and I was stopped from doing that too. So then we're stuck where we are.
We are where we are. It's not good. But again, I assure this board, those of you that are leaving, it's been great for me. I've felt tremendous support from you all throughout. I'm still in a state of shock because I felt like we were actually gaining some traction. But I will continue on. I never thought I would outlast you. And I will continue to work with the new board.
Well, I hope you always plan on outlasting me.
Yeah, that's only like a month and 2 weeks.
Any other questions?
Well, just let you know, I'm really not going to go anywhere.
Oh, I know. You need a job? So if there were any recommendations, if this board, knowing what this board knows, the benefit of the wisdom of your tenure, has any suggestions, I would gladly hear them. If not, we can continue on. Take public comment or do whatever.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Provost.
All right, Chair Edson has to step away for a few minutes. When's your arrival back to the closed session, do you think? 10 minutes. Okay. So I think that is, now we're going to move to public comment, if there's any public comment.
Okay, so this morning we talked about one of the issues with this fire and the response of this fire was...
Do we want to just make you staff comments so that
Sure.
you can talk longer?
Sure. Was a failure to communicate. Okay, this is a perfect example of failure to communicate. The fact that Mr. Kravitz had a conversation with Cal OES to discuss the 6 1/4 that we were told was not going to be on the county's coffers, but he has had a conversation with Cal OES that it is. That conversation never happened with me. It never happened with the CAO. I'm unaware if it happened with anyone else in the administrative office. That is a fundamental problem, is this lack of communication and this lack of understanding about response, recovery, OES, and financial budgetary decisions, because they really do go hand in hand. So I'm a little frustrated that that conversation didn't happen. I'd be curious who you had the conversation with Cal OES, because I have communications directly from Cal OES that I shared with the Board of Supervisors stating that we don't have to pay that match. So if that has changed, that's
a huge deal.
I'm going to have a major problem with that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, how does the authority work there if one hand of Cal OES is saying we need to pay the money, the other is saying we don't?
Right.
I mean, how do we get to the one that says we don't?
Right. And so I would say as soon as that conversation started happening, that would have been a good segue into, hold on, let me go get the auditor controller or the CAO to jump on this phone call or get in this meeting. Because this has a huge impact on the county. As far as matches go, everything that has to go with Butte Fire, we have always presented to the Board of Supervisors that Butte Fire matches under the Public Assistance Program would be borne by the general fund. We would have to find the money to do that, because if that is the priority for the Board of Supervisors, then we have to meet that funding requirement. That's always been the discussion. That was the discussion that we had with Mr. Kravitz in his budgetary meetings. That's been the discussion that we've had with the board. When I found out that we were not going to have to pay the 6 1/4, that brought our $1.4 million match, because if you recall early on in the emergency, we were talking about $1.4 to $1.7 million of match. That's why Mr. Moss and I went to Sacramento. That's why we were asking for legislative assistance in deferring that match some way, getting some assistance with that. When we found out we weren't going to have to pay that 6 1/4 on some of the projects, that was a huge relief for us. We got it in writing that we don't have to do that, so I am a little perturbed that I'm finding this out right now in a public meeting as opposed to having this discussion where we could find out the real facts of this. In addition, as far as why Mr. Kravitz didn't get staff, he did ask for staff early on. I want to say it was in the latter part of September, early part of October. We were all kind of struggling with understanding, who's going to pay for this? What's the match going to be? Is this going to be a contractor? Is it going to be a permanent employee? What are we looking at? What are we talking about? And he couldn't really explain to me. He couldn't explain to the CAO. He couldn't explain to the HR director exactly what it was that he needed, and I don't think he really knew what he needed. So we did try to work with him to try to get to the crux of the issues with regards to what is standing in your way, what can we do to assist you. When I realized, when we kind of worked all of that out, we said absolutely hire a program manager, hire project managers. We made sure that HR got the green light, go ahead, start running recruitments. They did run an ad for multiple positions, and those applications came in, and he chose not to fill one of the positions, and he chose to hire one of them. So out of the two that he ran, he ended up hiring one extra hire. That extra hire to date, we've paid over 1,500 hours. Okay. In addition, I specifically told Mr. Kravitz, as well as multiple other departments, and Cal OES and FEMA also stressed this, don't dump this on your staff. Hire contractors. It's much cleaner. We don't have to deal with this timekeeping stuff. We don't have to deal with they spent 4 hours on this and 4 hours on that. Just make it clean. Hire contractors. In addition, contractors, you can, with the scope of work, make sure that you're finding contractors that understand this, that understand how they respond to an emergency, how they take those resources that they have to build us through this recovery. That's the importance of a contractor, because that expertise is not here, and it's not always going to be here. But we can find contractors that are. And that's always been understood that we could hire contractors. So I think that it's been a little frustrating for me. I know it's been frustrating with Cal OES and with FEMA why we haven't and why we're still having these discussions. I think that there are limitations on how much we can pay for overhead, and I don't think it's in the best interest of this recovery to stack administration. We need to get people to actually be doing the work. And the work should not be, I don't believe, should be employees, either on an extra hire basis or on a permanent basis. It should be contractors, because it makes it clean and makes them specific to those respective projects. We definitely have to have oversight. And I think that, between my office administration and whatever department is involved in these recovery pieces, we can work with them. If we do need to backfill some, staff or hire some limited term positions or whatever, let's have that discussion. But those discussions aren't happening. Instead, this is getting put together and then it's coming to the Board of Supervisors, and then we're hearing all of these things that we're not entirely sure what the end result is going to be. And I'm not entirely sure how we're going to fund this, because I do know that there are limitations on indirect costs. Okay? So we can't, in terms of administration, we can't even charge all of this administration to a project. So this is way outside the scope of what is allowable within the grants that we're looking at. I think that, the same issues that Mr. Kravitz brought up in terms of staffing and being pulled in multiple directions can be said in every single department that had to deal with this fire. It could be said in Health and Human Services. It could be said in Animal Services. It could be said in Environmental Health. But what they did is they made this recovery, or they made that response, a priority. And it did mean that they had to forego other public services. They did. They absolutely did. Every department did that. Those are choices that each department has to make. With regards to funding, Mr. Kravitz said that he had put it in his budget and he was asked to take it out. I was at, maybe he had other budget meetings that I wasn't at. That didn't happen. We specifically said you need to discuss what the dollars are that we're talking about, and we need to include that information in a discussion with the board. The board needs to understand and make a decision. Do you want to fix the roads in both the FHW, the federal aid roads, and the non-federal aid roads? This is what the match is. Do you want to do all of it? Do you want to just do these? Do you want to do that? Give the board some options so that they can make a decision with regards to whether they want to pay the match, the whole match, a portion of the match. Give me a list of what's the worst, the worst burnt roads, whatever you needed in order to maybe make some priority decisions. And that never happened. It never came back forward. So we did have these discussions. When I realized Public Works was struggling in terms of moving forward, I specifically had frustrations with Cal OES because I felt like it was unfair that Environmental Health had a Cal OES person that would go weekly and meet with them and make sure, are you on this page? Are you on that page? What else do you have? How's the DROT going? How's this going? How's the coordination of this effort going? What's the progress? And I didn't feel like Public Works or Health and Human Services had that same luxury. And so with the fact that we had so many burned trees, and that was really a set in terms of scope, right? We had the hazard, the ash removal project, which was enormous. Trees are right behind it. And I felt like that really needed to be a priority, and we needed to do what we could in order to give Public Works whatever help we needed to. I made a phone call to Cal OES. I specifically talked to as high up as I could possibly go, and they did agree to give us some assistance. But Mr. Kravitz had to reach out to Cal OES and ask for it. He had to state what the assistance was that he needed. Cal OES can't come in and do the work for us, but they can offer us assistance by way of whether it's best practice or contract templates or other agencies that have maybe gone through this to give us, just fill in the blanks for us on various items. And that didn't happen. So I can bring the horse to the water, but I can't make him drink. And that's exactly what happened in this circumstance. So I feel like we did everything that we possibly could in order to coordinate and strategize and push this forward and give Public Works everything that we possibly could give them. And it wasn't taken. So, I really have concerns with this model. I felt like we had our own issues with the structure that we had during the Butte fire. Breaking it up further really concerns me because I think we even more so have a loss of control, an absolute setup for failure in terms of communication, and I don't agree with this at all.
Okay, well, thank you. Public comment? Al?
Well, big thank you for the work's been done here. I'm just amazed at how complex this is. And even more than being amazed, I'm so thankful that we got a good CAO. And I think we're going to have to put him to work. I think the taxpayers would want to have clarity and protect the taxpayers. And so what needs to be identified is what funds are available. And I think the CAO, working with Rebecca, can probably come to the answer of that. The next thing we need to know is what needs to be done and what will the cost be. This involves funds coming in from other entities. It makes it more complicated. And so the funds available from the county or from the taxpayer would probably relate to the matching funds rather than the whole cost of whatever project there is. So we need to identify the work and its cost. We need to identify our funds that we have available from the county and then put together a plan. And it's awful hard for the board to do this and or even to do it at a board meeting. And so you have to rely on the talent that you have. And that falls to our CAO. He's going to need to, just the OES has done recovery firework right now, and yet there's been no feedback on that with our plans under discussion now. And so that needs to be done. There was some attempt to do it, but apparently through communication problem, it was not successful. So once we get a clear picture, then we'll get recommendations from our county administrative officer, and then you'll be able to work on his recommendations after he's gathered all this information. And this is really, we're talking to the new board now. They're going to have to get into this to solve. Well, you're the new board, so it's up to you as to how you want to go. Now,
30 seconds.
One of the things that the new board may discuss would be maybe a slight reorientation of how county government is structured. You have one way is a line organization, a chain of command. This is where your department heads report to the CAO. They don't report to the board. The board doesn't make decisions on hiring and firing them. Because, right, you have authority in place.
Executive boss.
Yeah. And so you have five people making the decision of hiring and firing only one person, and that's your CAO. And the rest of it's his responsibility. Now, that makes it clean, even though it makes it harder work. I don't even know if it makes it harder work or not. But it makes it really clean, and then we can get direction and go forward.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
I would just like to comment on that real quick, and that is I would like to assure you, Al, and others that indeed the administrative office has been working very closely with all the departments, including especially the auditor controller, because of these disasters. So just if you ever wish to discuss that in further detail, I'm available. Thank you.
More public comment?
Public or staff?
Are you staff or public?
I'm a 3-minute person, I think.
Okay.
Mike Miller, Arnold, California. I have just a few comments. I worked here during the Butte fire when we were hearing the word HMGP and FMAG repeatedly, and that was an application process Calaveras Amador put together and submitted through the Public Works Department. It got waylaid and it was taken to you as a board, I believe in late December or early January when the CAO's office picked it up. Since that time, no projects have been submitted for either of those grants, and there was a telephone conversation October 5th with Cal OES about if we didn't get going, we were going to lose it. So the issue is you have to put attention to something and keep your attention on it. I'm going to jump around because I have different things here. We deobligated bridges when I was here last time as your Public Works Director because we couldn't do them and we couldn't afford them. I've been coming here for 10 years, 3 times as your Public Works Director. This is the first year I've heard that a bridge is going to be built, and it's being built because we have to pay the money back. For me, it's hard to look at this department and say anything other than this. It's understaffed. Most of the cuts have come to field positions. You can't find extra hire snowplow drivers. The department needs a complete review. Absolute complete review. I was in an agency, 2 cities and a special district that built an 18-mile pipeline. I went to a meeting once a week for 2.5 years with a design build team. We solicited for a design build team. They did everything. After our elected officials approved the projects in all 3 agencies, my requirement and my responsibility was once a week, half a day, report back to my board or my council on exactly what we were doing. That pipeline was built, completed, and put into operation in 2 years without me doing anything more than weekly meetings, and it was a successful project. So there's other ways of doing things you can't do or you don't have the staff to do. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, bring it back to the board. You guys have anything else you want to say?
No.
I do. I think it's time we realize to quit pointing fingers and get this damn job done. We've been spending a lot of time saying, you did this, you did this. That's not helping us, folks. We need to get back together and go the same direction together. Because right now it's not working. I'll reserve any more comments when the board sits in January.
Okay. That's it for our agenda items here. We're going to go back into closed session. I don't even get to hit this, but okay.